Hello. Another episode of WhickTV, a cross-ideological space where we come together to discuss issues both political and cultural, from the silly to the serious. Welcome to the all-white everything that I've brought together, right? The neck beard convention, as was told. We're going to be talking today about the Second Amendment. Is it obsolete? With the rising violence in gun violence, specifically in America, school shootings at all-time highs, more and more people being gunned down in the streets. Is it time to revisit the amendment and maybe make some adjustments? I don't know, but we're come together to find out, and I brought all these wonderful individuals. Everyone doing good today? Everyone feeling loose, chipper, right? Ready to get into it?
Yeah,
beautiful.
I'm excited, man.
Beautiful. Well, we're gonna start right with you, sir. 𝕾𝖎, is that how you say your name?
It's 𝕾𝖎.
𝕾𝖎. I'll do my best to remember it, but I will probably forget during this conversation, so forgive me. 𝕾𝖎, go ahead. What are your thoughts? Let's hear it.
So generally, I'm very, very pro Second Amendment. I think it's important to have an armed population to make sure we're safe from foreign and domestic enemies. Not that it'd be super easy for somebody to attack the United States. In fact, it'd probably be pretty difficult, obviously. But generally speaking, I just think it's good for self-defense at home, situations where you need it for self-defense out in public. And I just don't think it's a good idea or even probably feasibly possible to even implement any way to get guns out of our society.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here, and thanks for defending, our liberties, sir. We'll see if this continues as we go through our discussion. Next up, Admiral Gibbs. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Admiral Gibbs. I'm a variety streamer and content creator. I'm very pro 2A, and whenever I give my opening state, you'll see all the myriad reasons why.
Okay, excellent. I'm glad we're going to get into it. Next up, another first-time guest on my show, 𝕾𝖎𝖎𝖙𝖘𝖍𝖔𝖜. Is that how you say it?
Yes.
Go ahead.
All right. First of all, I want to thank Wick for having me on today. My name is 𝕾𝖎𝖎𝖙𝖘𝖍𝖔𝖜, and I am one of the co-hosts of a new channel, Two Guys Talking History, where we cover a lot of educational and contemporary historical and social topics. And I generally tend to find the Second Amendment to be outmoded, a relic of a much different military era for the United States and for military science in general.
Okay, we'll get into it, I'm sure, during the open. 𝕾𝖍, go ahead. 𝕾𝖍 the Giant.
Yeah, 𝕾𝖍, I don't have anything to plug. I'm just a enjoyer of the conversation. I'm a self-described disillusioned liberal. I have very left-leaning ideologies that are important to me, and but I think I just have a much more measured and complicated way of kind of wanting to implement those things into our society. But naturally, my most radical position is probably on guns. I'm very anti. I'm anti-Second Amendment. I have a lot of statistical and emotional reasons why, and I hope to share that with you guys today.
Okay, I'm sure you will, and this will be an interesting discussion. Pondering Politics, go ahead.
Hey everybody, I am Josiah. It's my real name, aka Pondering Politics, aka the artist formerly known as Ruminate, Destiny Orbiter, lefty, anti-Republican, anti-GOP. I think the Republican Party is the single greatest threat to the health of the United States. Also suffering from a persistent cough, so I apologize if I blow anybody's eardrums out. I'm not so much anti-Second Amendment as I am a recontextualization of it, a return to the pre-Heller era, like the pre-2008 era, where we understood that the Second Amendment is not absolute, it's not unlimited, like any other right. And I think that the right of fourth graders to make it to fifth grade without being riddled with bullets is infinitely more important than the right of seditionists and people who fantasize about overthrowing the government to hoard guns. So that's my position.
Okay, well, we'll see how this goes. Baby and Liberty, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not streaming today, but I am usually a Twitch streamer. If I'm live, I'm almost always doing a debate, doing an interview, or doing a breakdown of a story. We don't do those 10-hour long streams, reaction stuff. So it's come. Is something going on?
Yeah, Johnny Scarlett, thank you for the raid. 51 new people, appreciate it. Okay, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, no. Thank him. Give it a second. It's fine.
Yeah.
People know who I am in this space.
Fair enough, gang. Yeah, we're going to have a Second Amendment debate. It's going to get spicy, so make sure you hit that follow button if you haven't already. Sit back, kick back. Scott, yeah, what's your position here You wanna give us a little
Yeah, I mean,
TLDR before we get into it?
Yeah, I mean, I have a prepared opening statement, but I think the Second Amendment doesn't go far enough. I think that we need far more gun rights than even what any form of thought on the Second Amendment. But like I said, I have it written out. We'll get into that in the opening statement. I am an anarcho-capitalist, a libertarian, and I believe that property rights are human rights and self-defense are human rights as well. But I think it should be a fun stream. I'm not streaming right now, so you might end up with a couple of libertarians that I told to come on over here too. So you're gonna have a wild chat tonight.
I appreciate it. Mods, just again, remember, it's okay if they give ideas that we don't like. That's fine, right? Just hold them to the same standards you do everyone else. And with that, let's get into the discussion. Okay. Wow. So I guess first question to the anti-gun advocates, why do you hate freedom? And the first question to the pro-gun advocates, why do you want to kill children? And let's go with that. Let's see how it goes. What are you thinking?
So, do we not have opening statements?
You just did.
Oh,
I think those were our opening
Those
statements.
were our opening statements.
Okay. I prepared like an actual opening statement. I apologize. I assumed it was like a debate where we had opening statements on what we believe, but that's fine. I can can it.
Do you want to give your opening statement?
Why don't you share it now, Scott?
Something
to jump off of. Go ahead, brother. Why don't you just share it now, and then we'll go from there.
It's gonna be weird if I prepare.
Listen,
just say what you want to say.
No one will shame you.
I got it.
You know what I mean?
You want me to do? I'll do my prepared opening here. Much like the Mandalorian in Star Wars, guns have taken on an almost religious significance to native Texans. And as a Texan, it is my great pleasure to defend our inalienable right to bear arms. In 1835, the president of Mexico, San Antonio de 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙 returned from being presidente and absentee. Upon his return, he immediately and forcefully seized power. This is not the first nor the last time he would implement a corrupt dictatorship, openly ignoring the whims of his Congress. Santa Anna was a man who would use whatever cause, liberal or conservative, to gain power and not care for ideology. Upon his return to power, he repealed the Mexican Constitution and sent Colonel Domingo de 𝕾𝖎𝖎, I can't even say this, into Texas to force the return of a cannon that the Texans had been using for defense. Before opening hostilities, Colonel 𝕾𝖎𝖎 admitted to supporting the Federalist cause of the Texans. However, despite his sympathy, he still attempted to execute his corrupt and illegal orders, proving that even good men can be forced to fight for the evils of tyranny. On October 2nd, 1835...
Okay, history lesson over. Okay, let's come on.
All right,
come on.
Here's my point, is that basically smaller countries like Ukraine, Vietnam, Afghanistan, America, Texas have all beaten larger, more powerful countries. And the first step to tyranny is basically that they're going to disarm you, and they're going to use bleeding heart causes like tragedies like mass shootings in order to push the radical left agenda.
Do you think there's any basis? Let me ask you this, because obviously I'm not going to straw man you. I'm sure you're anti-mass shooting, but the way you speak about it so dismissively, just out of curiosity, do you think that mass shootings are tragic and frequent enough to warrant some sort of government response to it, or do you think it's just the cost of doing business?
I think that the gun-free zones are enabling the mass shootings to occur. So I think that, yes, there should be some sort of government response. Maybe we take veterans who can pass a psych eval that are looking for jobs, and we arm them and put them in schools. I mean, maybe we hire more security in general. I don't know. There's a lot of different solutions we could talk about.
I don't know if that's true.
A few bad apples is not the solution.
No, we don't have a few bad apples. We have an insane number of bad apples. All the apples are bad.
We have more mass shootings than calendar years.
I mean, the government's made of those bad apples, and you trust the government to come run it whenever individual citizenry is.
What in regards to specifically solving the gun? Okay, do you think we have a gun problem?
No.
Okay.
Interesting. So okay. Well, I'm kind of confused here. So, other developed countries which don't seem to suffer from whatever gun problem that we think it exists, but you don't, again, we've had more mass shootings in 2023 than calendar years. Other developed nations have a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of that. So what are they doing differently? And do you think that they're doing anything that we should aspire to?
Do you consider China a developed country? Because they're committing mass genocide on their populace. So, I mean, it depends on what you consider gun violence.
We are talking about mass shootings.
I mean, would you not consider rounding up the Ungar Muslims a mass shooting?
I think it's horrible. I think it's horrible, and it is absolutely... No, I think it's a little bit of a horrible, and it has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
I have a response to this. So I find that personally speaking, I find that mass shootings are not necessarily 100% a gun problem as much as they are a mental health issue in the United States. We need to have better safety nets and checks for these people all around, create systems where they're able to get help. That way they're not actually like just having to go through these terrible, terrible experiences that cause them to have this warped mind that makes them lash out against the public. That's probably like more important than just taking away everybody's guns, in my opinion.
Can you pronounce your username again for me? I'm so sorry. I want to make sure I pronounce it correct.
It's 𝕾𝖎𝖎.
𝕾𝖎𝖎. Okay. Out of curiosity, are you conservative or Republican?
No.
Okay. So I would agree with you that there probably does need to be some sort of mental health redress here. But I guess my first question would be, do you think that the United States, given statistically speaking that we experience gun violence and mass shootings at a ludicrously disproportionate rate compared to other developed nations, which are less, nations which are less powerful, less wealthy, do you think that we are uniquely mentally unhealthy as Americans?
So I think it's a really, really complicated issue. And when it comes to specifically your argument there, what I would say is you are correct that other nations have a way, way lower amount. But you have to understand that we're a completely different type of country than a lot of these countries that have banned guns and have had a lot of success with it. They never had the amount of guns that we have in our country currently, both registered and unregistered. And they're also not attached to a country that has an incredibly strong cartel system that brings in unregistered guns into our country. It's just a completely different scenario. I really, really hate those arguments because
half of what you just said describes the problem.
Right. Yeah, we're different
don't
because of the
have that many
problem that we
firearms.
have.
Yeah. So this is what I'm talking about when I say we have a gun problem.
Okay. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, how would you go about getting rid of all of the guns in the country?
I'm personally not proposing that. I don't even know.
What non-authoritarian way would you have?
Well, that's a straw man because I don't think anybody here on the pro gun control.
Well, let me
side,
ask: does anyone think we should just take the guns? Like, does anyone here think we should just start?
What do you think
taking guns off
abolishing
the
the
street?
Second Amendment does?
I'm happy to make that argument, but I don't need to do it for the purposes of the conversation.
Do you believe it? I'm not asking what you're prepared to argue. I'm asking what you believe, my friend.
No, I don't think I need to. So if you're going to ask me, how do I propose taking away all the guns of the American populace? How do you propose a wide sweeping mental health focus that's going to pay immediate dividends for preventing violence?
It certainly wouldn't be voting Republicans into power because they oppose any initiatives to increasing access and expansion of mental health.
Correct.
Like it's just politically not feasible.
I don't want to make it a left or right thing necessarily. I mean, there's people on both sides I disagree with. Okay.
I also already said that I'm not right wing. So generally speaking, I think that fixing the mental health issue in the United States would be significantly easier than getting rid of guns that already completely outnumber the amount of people in the United States, and those are registered firearms.
Sure.
And not even including the large amount of unregistered firearms in our country. That's why I think that it's important to talk about this as far as like the logistics, because we can talk about, maybe we should get rid of the Second Amendment. Maybe we should change things. What? Yeah.
I have to ask you a question. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
On the one hand, you're saying it's a uniquely mental health issue.
I never said it was uniquely.
You said that this can be fixed by addressing mental health.
Absolutely, yeah. I think for the most part, yeah.
Which I'm not opposed to, like a cultural shift towards like encouraging seeking therapy and things like this. Like I'm totally on board with. I just don't think you can simultaneously say, well, this is a mental health issue, and if we solve mental health, we'll fix the problem. And then also the sentence after that say, well, those other countries that do this are not quite like America. You know, those countries don't have access to guns like we do. They don't have a gun-centric culture like we do. Those are kind of like, it's like you're opting out of your initial stance on it by saying that we're different somehow.
It also seems to me...
Would you argue that we're not fundamentally different than those other countries?
I think we are because of the Second Amendment.
Right. See, to me, 𝕾𝖎𝖎, it's almost like a tacit concession, like you're saying, well, the reason that we're suffering from this problem is because we made the mistake for allowing the mass proliferation.
I don't think it was a mistake.
Guns.
No, you're putting that on to me. I don't think it was a mistake.
No, we're telling you it's a mistake.
Yeah, I believe it's a mistake. But what I'm saying is, so we agree that gun violence and mass shootings are occurring here in the United States this is a fact. This is not a matter of opinion, at a disproportionately high rate compared to other developed nations. You concede that. But you're saying that the reason that that's the case is because of something unique to the United States, which is the Second Amendment and the proliferation of guns. So what I'm saying is you're making a tacit concession there that if we hadn't allowed for the mass proliferation of guns in the first place, we wouldn't be experiencing the rate of gun violence here in the United States that we have. So if you want to make the case like there's no unringing that bell.
Venezuela leads.
Which
So,
is like
I
a
mean,
really interesting.
Venezuela's not a
post-hoc-
developed nation.
No, hold on.
What do you
Not
mean they're not
compared- hold
Not
on.
compared
Stop,
to
stop. I want to hear from Gibbs a little bit. He hasn't talked in a bit, so I want to hear what he's saying. Please.
I don't know how you can sit here and say that we're sitting here talking about, oh, it's only developed nations and say Venezuela's not. Or what are they, second world, not third world? I mean, it's definitely not like it's Haiti or something. You know, Venezuela had a robust
You think that those are
economy.
the only two categorizations between
Well,
countries?
hold on,
the United States or Haiti?
So, like, well, you said they're not developed. So, I mean, let's just define develop. I mean, Venezuela had a robust economy until a leftist leadership took over. And then, had. So they are developed. They were developed. I mean,
no, had is past tense.
Somebody took over and then
Right,
implemented the gun laws, and they took away the rights of their citizenry, and now they lead the world in crime. They're number one. Caracas is the most dangerous city in the world. So everything you're saying about us leading is a bold-faced lie. And
no, I said disproportionately high compared to other developed nations.
In other developed countries, the U.S. is blowing
so
everyone
Germany,
out of
the
the water.
United Kingdom, France,
Also,
Spain.
Also, even just the raw
Canada.
raw gun violence numbers were number 2.
So, I mean, you're just picking developed countries that fit your narrative.
That's because
no, I mean you're free to hang your hopes on Venezuela. That's great. I mean, I'm sure Brazil. You can go to Mexico as well. Afghanistan's another country. You can hang your hopes on them too. We're the United States of America.
Let's Fabian in for a minute.
This conversation is really interesting. I didn't realize it would turn into such a mid-wittery shit show so soon. But nevertheless, I guess we'll have to engage with the consequential kind of like tit for tat. We're not even mentioning studies, which I thought would be like the lowbrow shit, but we're actually going dumber than that, which is just kind of like arguing about developed nations and this and that. The problem is that the Second Amendment is an instantiation of Enlightenment philosophy by our founding fathers using, Enlightenment philosophy and the scientific method and utilitarianism, right, as a means of understanding convergence to get to deontological propositions, to get to natural law perspective, right? They didn't go far enough because the philosophy wasn't developed enough, but they recognized that there was something significant about a human right to a right to bear arms, a right to self-defense, right? Like Thomas Jefferson's first draft of the Declaration of Independence shows that he was a great admirer of John Locke when he wrote Life, Liberty, and Property, right? It was later changed to Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness because they were worried that property might incidentally justify slavery, and that was something that he wanted to do away with as an institution over time. But nevertheless, what you're talking about is we're all assuming that there is a consequentialist analysis here, that if the data can show in some regard, based off of subjective analysis and studies that can't really show causality, that it is okay to get rid of human rights in the name of a presumed better. And you're comparing to other developed nations. And I would just ask you, why not just compare to America? Why not compare to America in the 1970s, where children went to school and were trained in firearms, where it was very commonplace for people to bring firearms to school, where it still is in rural America to have firearms in the back of your pickup truck. Like, if you're gonna, like, why compare to Australia or compare to, Switzerland or New Zealand? There's a couple of countries that with more gun ownership and less gun violence, right?
We can talk about
why
that.
do all of that when we can just like what changed in terms of the value of the Second Amendment when we had more guns and less school shootings? Your argument just doesn't make any sense.
We have more guns now.
I think it's kind of funny
a lot
that
more guns in the United States now. It's something on the order of estimated like.
What do you mean by more?
No, I want to hear from Daedalus.
I'm talking about the prevalence of guns near schools and individuals that go to schools owning firearms. You can go into the country right now where school shootings don't occur. You can go into Kentucky, right, for example, and just go into a high school parking lot and you will find shotguns sitting on a gun rack in the school parking lot, and they don't have this issue. Okay. I'm not saying I magically know what the issue is, but when you posit that it must be guns and evidence is absolutely contrary to that, it's just a silly assertion.
It's kind of funny because there was like a mass shooting in Louisville, Kentucky, like 2 or 3 weeks ago that got national news. Number one. Number two, I think it's funny that you cast aspersions about midwittery, but you're conflating the Declaration of Independence with the Constitution. The Declaration of Independence
I'm
is a
not
fine
conflating
document.
the two.
Is a fine
no, no, no.
document,
If-
but
if
it is
you're-
not
no,
the
no, no, no.
highest law of the land. The Second Amendment is enshrined in the Constitution, which is superior to the Second Amendment or to the Declaration of Independence with respect to law in the United States. Number two. Number three. Hang on. Number three. You said quite a bit. You said quite a bit. I'm responding. I'm responding.
You're bullshitting.
So number three. So number three. The Second Amendment never guarantees an individual's right to bear arms. It says we the people. It refers. It's not. No, it's not. It's not random. The Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are indeed two separate documents.
Look, stop,
Dude,
stop, both of you, real quick. I just want to make. I want to set this for now.
Stupidity.
One point at a time. Make a point. Let someone respond. Make another point. Let someone respond, etc. Okay, just for the future.
I'll be very quick.
Quickly.
I was discussing the philosophy of the founding fathers. That is why I brought up the Declaration of Independence. If it went over your head, I understand a lot of people don't get philosophy, but like that's not my problem. Continue.
We can talk about the philosophy of the founding fathers. I'm glad you mentioned that Thomas Jefferson was a big fan of John Locke. Do you know what John Locke's opinion on the purpose of government was? It was to preserve the unalienable rights of the people.
John Locke was wrong about a lot of things. I call myself an anarchist, and yet 𝕵𝖎, that wrote the Anarchist Manifesto that gives us the A and the O, was also a minarchist. Like the idea, I never said that these were perfect ideas. What I said is that they were the beginning of the Enlightenment, and I even said that consequentialism and utilitarianism is trash. I simply said that they were working upon an idea of convergence and working around the ideas of natural law, and we have taken consequentialism even further, and it's been subverted by the Hegelianism and dialectic process and Marxism.
But wait, don't you think that's essentially what we're talking about here,
process.
Scott? Don't you think that's essentially what the conversation is about, though? We're essentially deciding between the lesser of two evils. You're essentially trying to decide.
There's no such thing as a lesser of two evils. It's a non.
I think it's that's a
silly statement.
I want to get
what do you mean?
Something
all evil is equal. That's philosophy.
I want to give space to Daedalus, who's been patient and haven't heard from him much. Daedalus, go ahead. I do have a question for the panel, maybe to get us on a single track here. We'll see. But Daedalus, go ahead, and then I'll ask my question, and then we'll see what happens. Right.
Yeah, I think it's pretty important to lay out that if you're going to look into the philosophy of the founding fathers, you're going to want to look at other documents apart from the Declaration. The intentions of the founding fathers laid out by Alexander Hamilton pretty clearly in the Federalist Papers, Federalist 29, that he has an intention of establishing a militia separate from a standing army. So the intention behind
the term the regulars, the
intention behind the Second Amendment is largely to give that power to the states to establish and regulate a militia as opposed to holding a standing army, which is largely irrelevant now, I think, because we have a permanent standing army. We've had one since the 70s in the close of the Vietnam War.
Well, it was also in opposition of a potential standing army, but
for the record, well regulated means well organized with a hierarchical structure. It does not mean government regulation. That's a modern understanding of language.
Means government regulation. That's absolutely Hamilton's intention.
Wick, I'm curious to know what you think your question is to get us on a single track here.
The way you asked that was
all over the place.
A little backhanded.
Can I just say, with respect to the well-regulated part, the well-regulated part to, I'm sorry, who's the gentleman there in the green shirt? Daedalus.
Yes.
He's right on the money, because it's illegal to have a paramilitary organization in the United States. Paramilitary organizations are outlawed in all 50 states. The Supreme Court's held since the 1880s that, like in Illinois state law, I think it was Illinois v. Presser, that an Illinois law prohibiting a paramilitary force was absolutely correct. So it was referring to government regulation, not just the ability of citizens to just arbitrarily organize in defiance of the state.
Yeah,
so
it's very
hold on, pause. If the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court says something is right, do you believe that it is morally right, no matter what it is that the Supreme Court says? And two, do you believe that it is always constitutionally right? Because somehow I think the overturning of Roe v. Wade, you would magically no longer think of SCOTUS as this beautiful institution that always gets it right in terms of philosophy, constitution, morality, etc. Like I think it's I understand the idea that it is illegal, but the idea that you're appealing to the authority of SCOTUS and therefore their interpretation must be correct, well, then you must believe that Roe v. Wade should have been overturned, correct?
I never gave any indication whatsoever about the moral judgment here. I'm simply saying that as the final arbiter of what is or is not constitution. What is or is not constitutional. It is simply a matter of constitutional reality that until the 2008 Heller decision, we understood that the Second Amendment referred to a militia as a government-regulated body of citizens, that it didn't guarantee individuals the right to bear arms, because women weren't allowed to carry guns, black people weren't allowed to carry guns. It didn't guarantee the right of every citizen. We keep guns away from minors, from felons. This is not a blanket wide guarantee.
He's asking you if you think that's the way it should be.
Do you want to answer my question though?
He's asking you what your opinion on that is.
Of whether or not it's the right thing morally that citizens are not guaranteed the right to bear arms.
It's a very simple question. It was very simple. I said you used the idea that SCOTUS said something, therefore that is the authority on what is and isn't constitutional.
It is.
That was what backed up your argument that something is or isn't constitutional based off of the opinions of SCOTUS. I simply said, that's interesting for someone that seems to be such a big lefty. Do you agree that if that is the logic that you're putting forward, then must it always be true, or is it only true in this instance?
The Supreme Court is
because
always,
it agrees with your historiography.
The Supreme Court is always the final arbiter of what is or is not constitutional, even when I disagree with it.
We're talking about whether a constitutional amendment should exist in its current format right now. We're not talking about whether something is constitutional or not.
I'm aware.
Okay, stop. What we're talking about. This is a good time. This is a good time for me to kind of insert my question because I think it plays into this, right? Regardless of the legality, the constitutionality, what the founding fathers did or did not intend, I don't. We can discuss that, but more importantly, do we think that owning a firearm is or should be a fundamental right that everyone has? And if you think there are exceptions, what exceptions would you put on this, if any? I'm very curious. What do you think, Ann?
When you say fundamental right, I think of... No. It makes me think of things that I consider to be natural and unalienable, okay? So when you say fundamental right, as kind of there's language in the Constitution about this, especially in the preamble. There's a right to the pursuit of happiness. There's a right to, I have it here, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for common defense as per the government. Those are the unalienable rights of the people. I don't really understand how owning a firearm falls under that category.
So you would say no is the answer to the question.
My answer is definitely no.
Not a fundamental right.
Not to attack my own flank, but I'm curious here. Do you not believe that the right to self-defense is fundamental?
Self-defense, yeah, but your right to self-defense is not exclusive to the ownership of a firearm.
But my question would be just given the, what's the word I want to look for? Force multiplier, I guess the level of technology now, given that much violence is conducted with firearms, do you think that the inalienable right to self-defense allows at least some guarantee, at least for some firearms?
I believe that the removal of firearms and the removal of the Second Amendment would mitigate the risk of assault from a firearm. I think it would be less of a concern.
Fair enough.
Okay. What about the rest of you? Do you believe that? Do you think if we got rid of all the guns, it'd make people safe?
No. It's almost virtually impossible, by the way.
I don't...
Hang on.
Okay, I also I think addressing I don't like the subtext of like it's almost impossible, because then we dive into this rabbit hole conversation about how you'd implement this policy, and that's not what we're here to determine. You can't say I think it'd be almost impossible, but also we should fix mental health. Those things are both seemingly impossible in today's society.
Okay, so is that not an important distinction to make, where if you want to have this conversation at all, because I feel like if your position is you want to get rid of the Second Amendment, you want to get rid of all the guns, then you probably need to have an actual functional reason, like, of how you're going to do that. What is that form going to take?
Well, first of all, buyback programs have worked in the past, but beyond that, I'm not here to argue the practical implementation of it. I'm here to argue the philosophy of it. We're here to determine whether the Second Amendment is obsolete or not. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the subsequent legislation. I'm talking about how do we feel about this? How do we feel about gun ownership and the Second Amendment? That's what I'm here to talk about.
Yeah, I don't think an unlimited right to firearms is going to make people safe. we have an enormous amount of firearms in the country already, and it hasn't made people safe.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I mean, as I guess I'll just round it out as the pro gun control side. I don't know if I support the abolition of the Second Amendment because I'm also considering the practical implications, and it's not just a philosophical question to me. But I do believe, like any other right, including your right to speech. Yeah, I mean, hell, in this environment, in this world, your right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness are all limited and all constrained by the government. And I think that the same thing applies with the Second Amendment. And then you got to go by a
Agreed.
policy, a case by case, policy by policy basis. So I'm not committing to the abolition of the Second Amendment. But I do think that it is like any other right; it deserves to be heavily constrained, especially when you consider the negative consequences.
Josiah, Wick asked you if you
So-
consider it to be a fundamental right.
So what I would say is, everyone should read Lysander Spooner's Constitution of No Authority, because at the end of the day, the Constitution is just a piece of paper and an idea that a bunch of people presumably subscribe to, though obviously there are individuals on this panel that don't believe in it. That being said, I'm one of those people, right? I don't think the Second Amendment goes far enough because it is indeed a fundamental right. I don't know that I would use the terms fundamental in the way that I would describe it. I would say that property rights and the right to freedom from aggression, negative rights, unlike the positive rights that are being put forward right now as a means to try and curtail your actual rights, is more than just fundamental. It's an objective fact that is grounded in starting in existence exists, then Aristotelian logic, moving on to the law of non-contradiction in that regard, and then performative contradictions. I think it can be absolutely proven that it is quite impossible to logically argue for aggression against people's persons and property without engaging in a performance, as Habermas would. So it is more than just a fundamental right. It is an objective fact of logic that aggressing and using power and violence against people's property and ability to defend themselves is a violation of natural law. And thus you are stopped from me not committing violence against you and imprisoning you until you recant those absurd obsessions.
I want to
Scott,
give
that was
Anja
intense.
some-
Would it be fair to say, just so I want to make sure I understand
After you,
correctly,
Anja, though. After you, Anja,
that-
go ahead.
that you support the Second Amendment, you don't think it goes far enough. You're not saying it's fundamental because you view it more as just a necessary means to an end to protect life and property. Is that fair to say? Is that what you mean?
No, I would say that property itself, which is the firearm, right? Because we're kind of like almost like reifying gun violence into the material reality of the gun itself. Not to borrow from like Lukács and and the fucking commies that they are, but it's a good term, so fuck it, I'll use it, right? Like we're putting this idea of gun violence onto an inanimate object, right? And so the inanimate object itself is property, and I have a right to my property, no matter what I do with it, so long as that isn't aggressing upon another person, right? There is something to be said, however, about the inherent threat of lifting a gun, right? So when I point a gun at you, I'm aggressing upon you because I'm showing and engaging this threat towards you. The same could be said about, let's say, a nuclear facility in the area. If you non-voluntarily build a nuclear power plant next door and it could blow up, that's kind of a threat to my home, right? So there is some argumentation that one could make about the inherent threat of bringing guns into certain spaces and your choice, right? But you can't really make that threat on public property like public schools because the existence of public property is already a violation of human rights.
Anja, go ahead before we get into that and go down that rabbit hole. Anja, please.
This conversation is a little bit frustrating for me on all sides because I feel like we're talking about philosophical and ideological ideas while simultaneously talking about real world material consequences as examples, but we're not willing to actually grapple with the entire picture, and we're just kind of talking about ideas right now. Ideas are great, but unless you have actual implementation, actual real world real world action that you can put into the world for it, I don't really see what is the point of having conversations like this unless it's the entire full scope. I'm somebody who does a lot of sociological research. I am also a political scientist. So personally, I read philosophy. I enjoy it as like a practitioner perspective, but I am not like someone who bases all of my entire ideas behind like philosophical thought.
Okay, Anja, let me ask you this directly.
That's not true. The philosophy speaks through you.
First of all, let me ask before anyone else goes, I have a question because you made an interesting statement and I'm curious. So say we did have a relatively safe, effective way to get rid of most of the guns, for the government to come and safely and effectively get rid of most of the guns in the United States. Say we had that mechanism in place today, and all we had to do was decide whether it was right to implement this method or not. If we had this method, would you be okay with it? So I guess what I'm trying to ask with this question is your opposition to this simply because you don't think it can happen, or because you have a philosophical kind of ethical saying, well, no, even if it could happen, I would still think it's wrong because I think it's wrong to take people's guns.
My philosophical issue with this conversation is that I do feel personally that it should be a right to defend yourself. Now, if there was no guns in the United States, there wouldn't be any need to defend yourself with a gun. You could learn martial arts. You could learn ways to protect yourself with your own hands.
Wait. Like that would just mean that women are fucked. Like,
because
handicapped people are fucked.
Guns are a pretty bad
right?
issue for women to begin with.
Like, I mean, like, look, if you don't have a gun, if guns have done more to equalize, I think, a lot of things. Like, because if you were handicapped, if you were like in a wheelchair, for example, right?
Okay, wait.
You aren't going to beat anyone up. Your gun is your only choice to defend yourself,
I just have to
right?
establish something.
No?
Does everyone here on the panel agree that I just hope there's no disagreements, because to proceed in this conversation, I think we all have to agree on this. Are guns the most efficient, accessible, and easiest way to inflict harm and death upon other creatures or human beings that we have available to us? No.
What do you mean by we have available to us? Like that exists in the world, or that like I can easily go to the store and purchase?
That you as a citizen have access to.
Knives, Walmart, go to the store, get a knife, stab something.
You think that knives are a more efficient and better tool for inflicting harm and murder than a gun is?
I mean, listen, up until the nuclear bomb, the battle that killed the most people.
I want you to say that you think a knife is a better tool for inflicting murder than a firearm is.
I'm saying that it's more efficient and easier with ease of access by what you defined earlier. Knives are substantially easier to get. I don't have to go do any background check to go buy a knife set from Walmart. I don't have
I'm talking about. Okay, we have a relatively accessible gun culture right now. As it stands right now, most places it's not that difficult to acquire a firearm. Obviously, this varies by state and by locale, but generally this is true. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Given that knives are also
the most pro-gun person here. Yes, guns are
okay, great.
Probably of the things you can easily get there, the greatest force multiplier.
Okay, great. So all things equal in terms of accessibility and availability, do you think that guns are the preeminent choice for someone who wants to inflict harm or murder on another person?
Yes.
In the United States, yes.
Anywhere in the world, really.
What do you mean by preeminent? I mean, it's an individual, like if we're trying to generalize, I would say probably for most people, right? Like, I mean, some people are probably more likely going to, I don't know, run someone over with a car. You know what I mean? Like, but
I mean, even by his own thing, he's wrong, because if we look at Rwanda, they were over here wiping people out with machetes. I mean, and that was in the 20th century. So, I mean, you're sitting here saying this when we're just ignoring what's the easiest way, which is
Admiral Gibbs. Admiral Gibbs.
The Rwanda again is not a related
for
event.
this. Okay, we're going to get rid of your kitchen knives. Right?
Yeah, I mean, they're doing that in the UK. I mean, they're literally going after the gun knives in the UK.
Okay, look,
Admiral, I'm confused.
Why are we fighting about this? Like, obviously, if you have a choice between a gun and a knife, you're taking the gun in almost every situation. Sure, not every. You can look at corner cases, right, where like they're just coming up at you, like really close combat situations. But if someone's breaking into my home, I don't reach for the knife, do I?
Admiral, come on. What does Mando use? Mando uses blasters, doesn't he? He's not pulling out a lightsaber, baby. I think so. I'm so sorry. Is it Kilo?
Kilo.
So Kilo, can you?
Have you not heard of the dark saber? What the fuck?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, spoiler alert for season 3. No, I'm kidding.
Hey, chill.
Yeah.
I just want to
go ahead, though.
I'm trying to round out what I'm getting at here, because
I will admit the force multiplier aspect, if that's what you're asking me to do. Yeah,
Well, of
sure.
course. And to be honest with you guys, I have to some earlier parts of the conversation I kind of want to walk away from. I don't really like making it about
Can I
mass
answer your
shootings.
last question though, Wick, before we continue move on to the next thing about the self-defense aspect? I just want to
Sure.
say that like if you're like y'all mentioned the women, you kind of stole my point from me that I was going to make was about the women. You know, like I'm a 300-pound former college wrestler. If I grab somebody, specifically a woman or even most men, they're not going to get away without a weapon of some kind if I'm trying to cause them bodily harm.
Okay.
So if we're sitting there taking away their
Okay,
weapons,
okay, Muhammad
Calm
Ali.
down, Stephen
We got
Crowder.
Can I
it.
round
I'm
this
not a
out?
Muhammad Ali guy. I'm just saying, like, even if I was just a super fat dude, I just hug him and fall
Wick,
over. They're gonna have a bad
I'm going to round
time.
this out. I'm going to round this out very briefly. If you
Is that a
replaced
fat
every
joke? That's fucked up, man.
I'm going to robust this out really briefly. So if you remove all of the firearms in America and you just snap your fingers Thanos style and they're gone overnight and you replace them with a knife, do you think that our murder rate would stay the same, increase, or decrease?
I would probably increase. It'd be hard to know though.
Our murder rate would increase if all of the guns were gone and we only had access to knives and machetes and shit. The murder rate would increase,
Yeah,
Scott.
well, so your specific analogy where we're like, and we're kind of thinking in fantasy land, nobody knows, right? Like to claim that you know would be
I have a
absurd.
pretty good idea.
Right.
Don't, I do. Go ahead.
Well, but probably not. But what I would surmise, right? If I'm using my imagination crystal ball style, all the guns magically gone the next day. What I would say is you would probably have the many of the South American cartels would grow in extreme power as they found a market void to sell guns back into the States. Unless we had an incredibly authoritarian southern border control system that went along with this. So we would fund the cartels massively. You couldn't get rid of all of the guns because the cops, presumably, you don't want to get rid of all the cops' guns.
It's a hypothetical. I'm
Maybe
trying to establish the preference for
no.
firearms as murder weapons.
Right. You asked the hypothetical. I'm going to engage with the hypothetical. Don't get mad when I engage with the
No,
hypothetical.
I'm not.
It
I
shows the
appreciate you
problems of the
engaging,
hypothetical.
Scott. I
Right?
appreciate you engaging,
what
but the
I would
purpose of the
say-
hypothetical is that guns are not part of the equation for us. You're introducing all these other variables.
What I would say is that there's no reason to believe that people that want to murder would not use knives if they want to murder
Yes,
an
there is.
individual. Right.
Yes, there is.
Well, I think the UK begs to differ because their crime rate increased after getting rid of their guns. That being said, I do not believe that that's anything other than a historical fact, right? I believe that there are other factors in play always, and that this idea that we can scientifically determine causality, that the guns is what increased the crime, is silly. I think only public health experts that do bullshit ideological studies try and do that crap, right? But that being
I thought you wanted to
said,
talk about
it
studies.
is a
Can I not use
historical
them?
fact. I mean, you can use them. I
Oh,
just
you
don't care.
froze. You
Even
said
if
to yell at
crime-
you when you froze, so I'm yelling at you when you froze. Okay.
Yeah, even if the crime rate doubled, I wouldn't give a fuck because it's a violation of liberty, right? Like I don't care about the consequential analysis. What I would say is that there are a multitude of other factors. In the example where you get rid of guns, I think the cartel would gain a lot of power. I think criminals very quickly would have access to firearms and citizens wouldn't, and criminals would have carte blanche because you're saying, hey, the best way to defend your home is with a firearm. And at the same time, even though there's data that shows that like baseball bats might be better, some people suck at using guns. Defensive violence statistics are all over the place. Nevertheless, if you believe that it's the best force multiplier, well, and criminals believe as such, well, then criminals now know that, well, I've got guns and most of these other people don't have guns, so I'm going to fucking use them. I think you'd probably see an emboldening of crime and a strengthening of the cartel, and the response would have to be a more authoritarian police state in order to deal with that crime specifically, which means cracking down on low socioeconomic status neighborhoods, more gang violence, more lost opportunities for poor and middle class in America. And I think what you would see is problems abound. Yeah.
I mean, let's just take what he's saying and go further with it. Like, look at stuff that we've
You've
already put
already
into
stretched the
practice.
scope of my hypothetical far beyond what I was trying to introduce.
Well,
But if you want to go further, go ahead.
I just want to use one point. Like, we sit here and talk about the good guy with a gun, bad guy, whatever. But I'm saying let's just look at something we've already implemented, which is like the war on drugs. That failed abysmally. We have more drugs than ever before. We cracked down on it. How are guns going to be any different? It's just going to be one organization providing a service that people want, one way or the other, and people want their guns.
Yeah, dude. The ATF is super popular.
Well, I want to hear an
puppies.
answer to that. I want to hear an answer to that. I want to hear an answer from the.
Oh, I didn't get an answer to my
anti-gun
question,
side.
but that's fine. We can proceed.
You just said I gave you too much of an answer to your question.
No. You twisted the scope, the parameters of what I was trying to ask you. You started introducing where the other guns come from and all this kind of shit.
You said, do I think crime would increase or decrease if we snapped our fingers and got rid of all of the guns in America? I said I think it would increase, and then I explained why.
Let me rephrase.
What are you talking about?
Let me rephrase for you. If I snap my fingers and guns were never invented, they didn't exist, do you think our murder rate would increase or decrease?
That's like that would change the entire history of the world in such a degree that I literally could not answer that question.
It's just the same thing that just happened, where you're expanding the scope of the hypothetical. I'm talking about the efficiency and preference for. Okay.
This isn't gonna go anywhere. I promise you. Okay, hypothetical is over. Hypothetical time gone.
World War II, all of these wars drastically just changed in history, or may not have happened. I don't fucking know. I still don't know what the situation that I gave. You said, what do you think would happen? So if I thought guns were never invented, I think a similar, different type of weapon that is a force multiplier likely would have been created, because there is a market need and a desire from people to have powerful weapons. To
replace them with a knife.
Aggression, etc.
For the purposes of what I'm asking you, replace them with a knife. No ray guns exist.
Okay, so in your hypothetical, we did not create anything more substantially violent than knives, or with the capacity as a force multiplier to commit violence than knives. What I would say then is that in order for that to have occurred, the psychology of humans would have had to have been so fundamentally different.
Yeah. Okay. It was
desires.
It was different.
That it would totally change the world.
Yeah. That's what happened in the hypothetical. Yes.
Well,
how far do you want to take this? I mean, like, are we an alien species now?
Right,
I don't know. We all sing fucking kumbaya. I don't know.
Okay.
Anja, I agree with you, buddy. Like, I'm not a philosopher by trade either. Like, I got my degree in political science as well. Like, I'm more interested in looking at not only the constitutionality of things, but also like the practical application of potential law. That's why, like, again, like some of these things I don't have a concrete answer for and don't pretend to. Like, to me, it's not a question of Second Amendment abolition, because number one, it's just not feasible in the first place. I think that we could probably impose more stringent gun control measures in
Can you give us some examples of that? Just real quick, to speak of the practical, what do you think are some practical gun control restrictions that you would advocate for today, that you think we could, at least in some states and maybe more anti-gun states, that you think you could pass and you think would be good?
So a lot of these
give us one, and then we can deal with it, right?
So background checks would be good. Universal background checks, if it could be imposed at a federal level, would be nice. Potentially red flag laws. But here's the thing. Here, let me just clarify here. So part of the problem is. Hang on 1 second. So part of
red flag laws, they don't get enforced.
So part of the problem is that a lot of the research, like that, we have huge gaps in research in terms of the efficacy of gun control because of the 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙 Amendment, which was passed in 1996. Which basically forbade the CDC from doing comprehensive research into the successes or failures of gun control. And it's basically been imposed for the past, 20-something years. So to me, like what I personally use, I defer to, I don't know if you're familiar with the RAND Corporation. They're a nonprofit. They're an NGO that does like the biggest analysis that I'm aware of in terms of the efficacy of gun control laws. And they're brutally honest. They're like, listen, there's some evidence to indicate that some gun control measures, again, like red flag laws or background checks, would curtail or reduce some types of gun violence and not others.
Okay, let's put a pin in this, right? And first of all, Fondue for $5 says, who is dying to guns specifically if the majority are criminals? Why blame that on guns?
The majority
are suicides.
The majority is suicides.
Majority are suicides.
54%.
But to let's just address to the pro Second Amendment folks in the room. Do you have do you have problems with the proposal he just gave? Red flag laws and background checks were the two. And if you do, what are those problems? And let's talk about it. Let's discuss it. What is wrong with the
background checks? There's nothing per se wrong with. I mean, like obviously I'm an anarchist, so like I don't like the government instituting anything. But like assuming putting on my like chud hat, right, and just being like a standard Republican, right, for a moment. Like the problem with background check laws is that they just don't fucking work. Like there's almost like the Obama administration suspended like reporting the data on background checks because they had like I think it was something like 80,000. I don't have the exact number available to me. Like incidences of like the background system going off. And then what ended up occurring was that they had like less than a dozen cases brought. And then it was in the single digits in terms of convictions. The fact of the matter is criminals with criminal records aren't retarded. Like I know like we think they're dumb because they're criminals. And in many ways they are, but they're not like, they're at least as smart as Forrest Gump, and they don't buy a fucking gun where you have to go get a background check. They just go buy it off the streets where they're widely available. So it's just like you would, if you're going to say background checks, then you'd have to come up with a more draconian background check. And then once we start getting into that, what do those infringements look like? All of a sudden you start to find problems, right? So people will use the term background checks because it sounds common sense, but really it doesn't really do anything. It's a non-answer that is just kind of touted out for like along party lines. So that would be my issue with background checks. The what was the second?
Red flag laws.
Well, first of all, let's stick to the background check first. Before we go off too far, right? Let's stick to the background check.
Well, yeah, I was just trying to answer both.
I understand, but I want to deal with this one at a time because otherwise it gets lost in the sauce a little bit. So background checks, gang. For those of you who are for it, why is Scott wrong here?
Can I piggyback off that before you go on?
Briefly, yes.
So I actually don't have a problem with background checks as a conservative for the same reason I think we need voter ID law. I would like to know who is buying what, and if they're buying guns. You know, let's say that you have the thing. I want to make sure you're not a felon. You know, cool. Let's background check them. If you're gonna go vote, make them have an ID. Make sure they're not a dead person. It's real simple to me, but it seems like people have some real hypocritical views on those kind of things when it comes to one thing or the other. It just turns into ideology. And so in the end, I say, no, if we're not going to have one, then we shouldn't have the other. So let's just have no background checks for anybody.
I lost all my guns. I clearly don't own guns in case any glowies are listening.
Noted. Okay. Those of you pro background check here, explain why.
Generally speaking, I would say that I'm pro background check.
Please.
There are plenty of places in the United States that do attempt to do background checks when they sell people guns. Obviously, we don't have a super great system for that in place right now. Currently, my issue is I think background checks can help, and I think red flag laws get a little complicated though too as well. But we can talk about that later. Background checks can help, but I think it is important to recognize that, like I said before, the amount of unregulated guns on the street out there are just way, way more than you would even think, and gives so many people ease of access to these firearms that even if there was background checks, even if there was a database that you could have easily accessible, you would just still never know. It's impossible.
Do you think? I guess I don't think anybody here, in terms of, again, like practical application, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I know I certainly would not commit to the idea that any sort of gun control measure would be a panacea. So like even the practical application or practical issues that you just identified. But do you think that the government, I guess, has a vested interest in making a good faith effort? Because you at least agree with the logic of gun control measures. You concede that they might work, even though that they would not work perfectly. But do you think that there's enough justification to pursue it anyway? Because that's what I think. I think government has an interest to at least attempt to address issues with gun violence in this country, even if the research is mixed, even if it may not be perfectly applied or completely eliminate the problem. Do you agree with that or disagree?
Of course, yeah. You're never going to be 100% for sure about any sort of legislation that you're bringing up. I think it is important, and the role of the government to make decisions like that. But
that's something. I mean, because I'm not going to challenge you.
Do you think they would? Let me ask you this. I'm I almost called you ruminate. Pondering politics.
Sir.
Do you think background checks would be effective?
Yeah, I think again. So
Why?
here's the,
Why do you think they'd be effective? Like,
because
they
there's some studies. There's some
Okay,
studies
go
that
ahead.
indicate as much. So we know, or at least this was the case, that the large majority of gun owners in this
Okay,
country.
you're skipping something. So, like, I get it that some studies say they might be, but why do they say this? What do they point to as a reason that they're effective? Does that make sense? We can skip the studies say part. We can just say why they're effective, right?
Because a large majority of gun owners purchase their firearms from like licensed dealers and whatnot. So that's typically the main avenue by which people purchase guns. And that if there were enforced background checks on a federal level, then it would just, I mean, logically, it seems like it would catch more people. It would trip people in terms of like, I don't know what the term is, but basically people who would breach who would violate the background checks, like who would trip the background alerts if the vast majority of people are not getting their guns from back alley dealers or whatnot. So it seems like that would be the most effective way to do it.
Wait, do y'all think that
It makes
lawful
no
gun
s-
owners are like committing the most crimes? Because if they're following the law and whatnot, I would say generally those are probably not the guys going and committing gun crime.
I'm sorry, could you
Right,
repeat that? You cut out on me.
I'm saying I don't think that the lawful gun owners are the ones committing the most gun crime. I mean, we talk about mass shootings and whatnot, but if you look at mass shootings from like a gang violence perspective and include anybody that's been a shooting of 3, criminals drastically uptick as opposed to random mental health incidents like
You don't
that
think?
cause these mass shootings.
Well, I said that like the vast majority of gun owners purchase their guns from licensed dealers, not that they don't go on to become
No,
criminals later on.
Just to be clear, I
No, you
consider
think what's following those laws
I want to
doing
answer
the-
your question, Gibbs. So I
Sure, go ahead.
consider the mass shooting data a little bit less compelling than just the raw like handgun suicide homicide rates. But just for the purposes of the conversation, the 10 deadliest U.S. shootings of the past decade all involve legally purchased guns. I think that this is somewhat of a trend. Sorry, my camera keeps freezing. I think there's somewhat of a trend. I don't have hard numbers on it. It just seems like it's routinely in the news that this firearm used for this crime was purchased legally.
Yeah,
So
but the problem with that is that like you're talking about an extreme outlier when you're talking about mass shootings.
I
Right?
agree with you.
Unless you're including gang violence, and if you look at gang violence, right, then the majority of them are committed by illegally purchased handguns, right? So you can't have your cake and eat it too. Either you put gang violence into the data, right, and then when you do that, what you're going to find is that a majority of crime and a majority of gun violence is committed by not law-abiding citizens that go and buy stores where background checks aren't changing anything, and also where background checks aren't changing anything in this regard either, because a majority of those crimes are committed with illegally purchased firearms, so they wouldn't have been caught by a background check. What my original point about the background check isn't like from a consequentialist perspective, right? Which I just think you're wrong for trying to violate human rights and take away guns regardless of whatever fucking data you bring. But if I step into your area, right, where we do a tit for tat on what I think will reduce violence and, crystal ball and say we can take away people's human rights because we think it will be better. If I step into that arena, the problem is that the way background checks are currently implemented, mostly what they do is stop legal Black people and Latinos from being able to purchase firearms because they're so shitty that they go mostly by similar names or the same name. And the overwhelming majority of people that get stopped from purchasing a firearm via background check are people that have the same name as a criminal. And usually when people have the same name as a criminal, they tend to live in areas with higher crime. So as of right now, background checks are trash. If you want to implement them from your perspective, you're going to have to be more draconian, which means you're going to have to, at the very least, change it from like similar sounding names into the same way that you get a background check when you apply for a job, which means we're tracking your social security, we're tracking your employment history, we're tracking, what crime you may have committed in every single state. And it's going to be more draconian. And that's when you start getting into the area where, at the very least, the family values consequentialists, also known as Republicans, right? Because they're not fucking tradcons, because they're not fucking deontologists. But nevertheless, the family values consequentialists are going to start getting mad when you're tracking all of that fucking information just to purchase a firearm.
Why is it a problem that the government tracks if you committed crimes in other states? right? Like, I mean, if you went and did terrible, terrible things in Ohio, wouldn't it be good if they knew that in Florida?
The existence of the government is a problem. Nevertheless,
Yeah,
the
you're asking the
problem
wrong
would be-
person, Wick.
Oh, fair.
Yeah,
right,
that-
but
that-
My
the
bad.
what I'm,
Okay.
I'm
But-
just I'm just giving examples of how extensive it is when you get a background check for an employment, right? And how they're different than the background checks that are done when people purchase firearms. And there used to be I don't understand why it's so bad, right? Like I don't know that I have a perfect answer for that. It appears to me that there were individual players and NGOs and people that gather data that liked the idea of 70,000 purchases being stopped and how amazing background checks are, except that they're just not effective as they are. So when we say background checks, I'm not per se against background checks when I step into your arena of pragmatism. What I'm saying is just saying that phrase is kind of silly because the current ones do nothing.
Well, this is
Yeah,
why
so-
I'm trying to dig down on the thing. But go ahead, Kilo.
Well, I just wanted to say, I don't mean to throw Pondering under the bus here because he's on my side, but yeah, background checks I'm not super passionate about. I don't think there's I don't have these numbers on hand. I have some numbers, but I don't have background check
Well,
numbers. I
same
think
question
that
to you
they've-
then, Kilo. Same question to you then, Kilo. To ask Pondering there. What practical laws or restrictions would you place today? Would you advocate that states or the federal government implement today that would reduce guns on the streets? That you think would be
removing
okay?
them, stopping the production, the distribution, the resale, all of it. But so that's where I'm coming
I
at this
mean,
from.
that's your ideal goal, but do you think these are practical solutions?
No.
Okay,
this
so
is
that's
a
what I'm
very
asking.
idealist argument.
What practical solution would you advocate for? I see you, Daedalus. We're good to get to you
Wait,
next.
to clarify, I'm confused. Did you say that would reduce guns or gun violence? I
Either
thought you said
one.
guns. Okay.
Yeah.
I think removing guns removes the gun violence. I only really care about the gun violence. Practical steps, things that I think we can implement today are capital investment in impoverished areas, a reinforced like allocation of funds towards education, infrastructure. Places that struggle with violent crime are often places that are just not as well off, obviously.
So neither of those involve taking guns?
You're asking, no, I want to take all the guns. You're asking me what the most practical approach to this is.
Okay, fair enough. Daedalus, give me the answer. You heard the
All right.
question.
Background checks are not really going to be effective. What you want is waiting periods, because the biggest problem you have with gun-related injuries is suicides. And waiting periods and keeping people from having access to a lethal means of ending their life is going to make it much easier to get them help, get people out of crisis. If they don't immediately have something to hand, they're not going to usually, by what we see research, they're not going to usually go on to something else.
Do you have a waiting period in mind? Are we talking a week, 2 weeks, a month? What are we talking here?
I would say something on the order of maybe 3 weeks to a month. It gives you plenty of time. You still have access to people who want to purchase weapons can eventually get those weapons, and you still have this kind of period.
Can I throw
Sorry.
these out there and then you tell me what you all think about this? Because I found
Well, before hold on to that
Good.
thought. I do want to let you, but I'm curious to the pro Second Amendment side. Waiting periods. Does that seem like if there were no background checks, no other things, and you just had to wait a month to get your gun, would that be acceptable?
that violates
So-
property rights, doesn't it, Scott?
Yeah, it violates property rights. But even from a pragmatic perspective, the only thing you're going to reduce with that is suicidality.
That's
That's
very
not
compelling.
That's a significant chunk.
Very compelling.
I think people have a right to commit suicide, but I'll set that one aside. If they want to commit suicide, I don't think I have a right to intervene to stop them from doing so, if that's their choice. I think it's a bad one. But nevertheless, I think talking about gun violence and then adding suicide into the equation, it's an entirely separate issue. That's just the means by which one does it.
That's the most
That
important
being said,
component of it.
why is that the most important component of it? Because
For
it
the same-
inflates your numbers for the conversation?
I think it actually gives him
Those-
a good point because if that comes into the mental health question.
No,
You know,
that's
if-
fine. I never said I didn't want to address mental health.
Okay.
That's fine.
What
just
I
the
would
raw-
say in
go
terms
ahead.
of what I would say in terms of crime, right? In terms of gang violence, waiting periods aren't going to stop them from getting guns because they're already buying them illegally. And in terms of mass shootings, I mean, these people are usually are often writing manifestos in Discord servers with retired FBI agents. I don't know that that a 3-week waiting period when they're looking at the 17 different firearms that they want to use is actually going to do anything other than make them change their schedule before they issue. So like I'm trying to figure out what the usage of it is.
I
other
definitely
than
think
denying rights and saying we're doing something.
So the consequence of the significance of denying rights, compared to a potential like meager decrease in at least some suicides, maybe homicides. How do you weigh those two things?
I mean, I want to jump in here and say that it comes back to Benjamin Franklin saying those that prefer security over freedom or give up their freedoms for security deserve neither. I mean, that's kind of what we got going on here. We're gonna make the wait somebody get their legally owned weapon. Give me a
I
break.
agree with that.
I hate to call out my side, but if you look further into that, he's
you
talking
wanna
about
read
like
that quote a
public
little more.
education and taxes, and like
I mean,
he's
still,
basically
it's
arguing
all-
for government intervention. It's a
I don't
weird
know.
case.
Benjamin Franklin is explicitly making an argument for intervention at that point. He's talking about the Penn family not paying taxes for the common defense of the colony of Pennsylvania. That's very different than it's commonly used.
Yeah, I'd say he's wrong, and I'd say the quote by itself is based, but nevertheless, I'd be careful with that one because a smart lefty will call you out. Luckily, I'm here to give it to you with the soft gloves.
So I just sent a link out to the group chat, and I was wondering what you all might make of this, because again, so I telegraphed it earlier. This is the source that I tend to refer to the most when I discuss Second Amendment related issues, which is relatively rare, which is the RAND Corporation. I don't know how many of you are familiar with what they've done. As far as I can tell, it's the most comprehensive and most brutally honest in terms of aggregating the data while acknowledging all of the issues with it. They're very forthcoming. Like, there's so many flaws in the research because, again, a large part due to the Dickey Amendment. But like some of the proposals that they say, based on the available data, the various studies over the years, when they refer to gun policies that may decrease certain outcomes like violent crime, unintentional death and injury, suicide, mass shootings, some of the things that they say with moderate evidence, I'll just throw these out there. Background checks, so that's why I referred to that. Prohibitions associated with domestic violence. So, again, if you have a record or a charge or a conviction for domestic violence, being kept away from guns, child access and prevention laws, waiting periods, minimum age requirements. Are the pro-Second Amendment side, are any of you like receptive to that? And even on my side, because I know we've all been going back and forth. We had Scott kind of take a shot at his side. I know 𝕾𝖍, you and I have had some disagreements. Like, what do we think about any of these proposals in terms of their efficacy?
There's one in terms of their efficacy that I think, because I've looked at the RAND's research before.
Well, before you get into that, what do you think of RAND? Just out of curiosity, like, do you think they're full of shit, or do you like, in terms of comprehensiveness, like, do you find them credible?
I'm less worried about the credibility of an institution and more so just looking at an individual piece of research and their methodology. Do I think they're lying in what they report? No. Do I think that every scientist always has, and every peer-reviewed study always has blind spots? Yes.
Sure. Okay, fair enough. I'm sorry. So go ahead.
The efficacy. There is one thing that they are correct on from a pure efficacy standpoint, right? Which is domestic violence. And the reason I would say that the evidence is pretty strong on that is because individuals that commit domestic violence are not your typical criminal, right? They're not in a gang. They're not robbing people out of desperation, right? Like, what you have is a kind of like a third degree murder or kind of similar situation that you're attempting to prevent, like these crimes of passion, right? So you have people that can, for the most part, function in society without engaging in criminal behavior, but for whatever reason lose it or lose their control or their narcissism or whatever. Like, there's a lot of, I don't want to, like, my background's in psychology, so I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole. But so I want to keep it like layman. But basically,
thank you, Scott. Appreciate that.
You're dealing with people that the issue is a control issue, and while that is typical of criminals in general, it's not their day-to-day life. And so these people aren't likely to just simply go to the black market in the ghetto and try and find somebody to buy guns out of a trunk, because they don't have those connections. That's not the life that they live. etc. And so I do think, even though I'm against it from a property rights perspective, and I think that there are other better ways that the market can fix this, I do think that that is an obviously efficacious way to stop domestic violence murders via firearms. That being said, I don't know that they wouldn't just stab a bitch.
On that note, not the stabbing a bitch note, but on the note of efficacy and things. So first thing, gang, if you like this kind of content, if you're hungry for the political content rather than the drama content, you got to make it worth my while, right? You got to incentivize me with the market forces, right, to continue to cover this kind of stuff rather than jump into the drama side of things. So get those subs, get those bits, all those things really helps me out. YouTube side,
I'll
like
point
and
out there, if
subscribe.
with donations and everything, Scott is being very generous. He told us in private that he will vote for President Biden in 2024 if we get WhickTV to a certain subscriber level.
Why you gotta lie like that?
Isn't that right, Scott? Come on, Scott. Come on.
Lie? But let's
So, I
do
mean,
the
you know, so the accelerationist in me almost wants to agree with you, because if there's anything I could do to destroy the country faster, it would
here
definitely
we
be to
go.
vote for Biden.
let me get back to the discussion at hand. I want to switch tacks just a small bit, and I want to ask the pro Second Amendment side. If not guns, right? What is your solution to the rise of gun violence in America? Or do you think it's simply the cost of doing business, right? That, we just got to protect these rights, and if a bunch of kids die, that's unfortunate, but rights are more important. Like,
We don't have to
what
say a
are our
bunch of kids
solutions here?
Kids, just to be
I would
clear,
give two solutions. I would give
just
two
to be clear,
solutions.
really quick, Scott. I just want to be clear.
Yeah, go ahead.
The conversations surrounding mass shootings and things like that, I know that there's a lot of pro 2A people that just fucking cringe whenever it gets mentioned in these conversations. We don't have to talk about those things. I don't have to phrase it as, well, what about all the dead kids? We know that that is a fraction of the problem that we're trying to address here. We can just say gun-related deaths, gun-related
I'll
violence,
say it however I
gun-related
like
suicides.
on my show.
I'm just saying it feels disingenuous to me. I'm not arguing from that perspective.
From
Yeah, so-
Temperance Skill for $5 says, I'm a little disappointed that you don't have a woman on the panel, LOL. None of them volunteered. I asked for people to show up, right? And I put out a tweet saying, come on my show. I didn't get a single response.
That person is
from a woman,
making many
unfortunately.
presumptions here.
Oh,
I don't
Right.
think
anyway,
we've all
but
gendered
solutions.
ourselves.
Carry on.
So solution number one, you all are going to think it's a meme, so I'm just going to move on very quickly from it. The first thing you should do is abolish public schools and institute actually giving that money back to people, because depending on where you live in America, you know, the average amount of money that is spent on a school age child is somewhere between $11,000 to $25,000 per year per school age child. So I mean, like, someone living in New York City with 3 kids, maybe $75,000 in their bank account might really allow them a better education experience than New York City public schools. That being said, no one's going to accept that, because, good men, plant seeds for trees of which the shade they will never sit in. So a more pragmatic, immediate solution, I would say, number one, additional options in schools. I wouldn't say school choice so much, but allowing people to divest from public school and public education and have that money given to them to go somewhere else. What the hell? The other thing that I would say is, what I would do is, magic wand. I know it's a stated solution, but it is one nevertheless. I would reduce the workload that guidance counselors are currently dealing with in terms of trying to funnel kids into college and trying to do administrative work that should be done by other school officials. And I would institute that every report card period, every single student has a mandatory session where they're taken out of class. And it's just your time, and you just go to the guidance counselor. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. You just have to have a meeting like 2 to 4 times a year with those and all throughout the country. The reason I would do this is because I think we talk about the stigma of mental health. And I think there's a lot of conversations about crazy or about like how these people are insane or all these other things. When really most mental health is about, training parents, recognizing problems, catching them before they become an issue. And I don't want to normalize, and make cool mental health disorders. What I would rather do is normalize that everyone just goes to the guidance counselor because they do, and no one gets made fun of or bullied because that's just normal that every kid goes to the guidance counselor, and therefore every kid has an opportunity to speak to somebody about whatever may be an issue.
And I want to hear,
in crime-ridden areas or, the mass shooting kids.
I want to hear responses to that, but first, two things. $5 from Fondue to ask, what about defensive use of firearms? How do they stack with gun deaths? And I'm curious, but there's a second question here. And this is how they phrased it. Okay, don't get mad at me. Ask that lib in the center, if he is so apt to restrict the rights of free Americans, yet is driven by the most impactful policy possible, and is willing to restrict these rights before the actions of others, why doesn't he just ban Okay. Nope, I got through half of this. I don't think I can finish it. Why don't just ban...
Was Kilo the lib in the center? It could...
Yeah.
I was about to say, I don't think that...
Was this addressed to me?
To the lib in the center. That's you, I believe, Ruminate.
Oh, no, that's
It's not Ruminate.
Pondering politics.
Pondering. Yeah.
Pondering is
Am
in
I
my center.
Am I in the center? I
You are in the
on my
center.
screen. I'm
on my
the...
screen. You're in the center.
That's
Oh. Okay. Well, can you finish the question so I know
Sure.
what I'm answering?
Why doesn't he just ban Black Americans from owning firearms to solve half the murder? It's sound, valid, and consistent with the logic he has displayed so far, and doesn't seem to believe that rights are deontological. So be consistent.
So if I'm just interested in efficacy, why don't I just ban Black Americans?
Yes.
What I would say, and I kind of got into this on Twitter with somebody earlier, they made the point about men, since men disproportionately commit crime. I would say that is an unnecessary step, right? So society is created for, by people, men, Black people, and others, and we don't need to try to take the aggressive step to remove them from society when we can take the smaller step.
This is not a
to try to
serious
address
question.
guns.
You don't have to dignify this with an answer. That's not a
Yeah,
serious
this is
question.
a-
There's no way.
Okay, fair
It's
enough.
Hey,
not
why
a
don't?
serious
Hey,
question.
wait, hold on. Because why don't? In the interest, if we're just talking about efficacy, why don't we just remove all the people? If there's no people here, then no one will get killed. That's completely ridiculous. Like, don't even dignify that with an answer.
No. It's literally what happens when you don't actually have any sound philosophical axioms that you go off of. What he's doing is he's highlighting your consequentialist framework, that so long as it works for the greater good. It's no different than the scenario where someone talks about a child being abused in a basement, and you learn at the age of 18 that your perfect utopia exists only because of this. Would you be willing to live in the utopia based off of that? It's just another thought experiment. I mean, you could go a step further if you really want to go about it. If we're so concerned about suicides, then we should just ban trans people from having firearms.
Okay,
because trans people
I want my
are the ones
channel
that
to
have
still
such an
exist
insanely
after
high
today.
suicide rate.
I want my channel to still exist.
There's no
after
TOS
today.
violation there.
Okay,
You might be okay on that. Wick, I don't know.
I don't
I don't know. I think we should probably triage our
trans
responses.
interviews all the time.
I think
know
we
where
should
the TOS
probably...
Let's get to the first question that was asked. What about defensive use of firearms? How do they stack with gun death? What are we thinking?
I'm trying to find numbers, but it's kind of nebulous.
You're frozen.
That's one of those things that is blocked pretty substantially research-wise. So you have a lot of cases, a whole lot of cases. The only real numbers I was able to find prior to this was the FBI's database on officer-involved shootings, and that is only about 5% of gun deaths in total.
I think the other stat you can
not.
look up is wrongful death cases, because a lot of times self-defense gets sued other civil court cases.
Yeah,
Wrongful death.
there's not a whole lot of very ironclad numbers there.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll ask then. So Fabian Scott gave us two solutions that he had. For those of you also on his side in this debate, ostensibly, do you agree with those solutions? Are there other solutions you would put forward? Like, what is the answer to the rise in gun violence in America?
I mean, I'm going to
If not gun control. If not gun control, then what?
Well, I'm going to take what you said in your original question when you asked it, which is, or is that the price of doing business? And I'm going to say yes. It is the price of doing business. And I mean, I think it's a fundamental right that is necessary. You know, we were talking about the regulated militia earlier. You know, part of the regulated militia back in the day was the Minutemen. The whole idea was they could be ready in a minute. You know, that means they were average citizens that were ready and had weapons at hand, like to defend themselves. The purpose of the guns is for the government to fear its populace so that they don't, you know, project these bad things onto us. So for me to sit here and go, okay, yeah, these are bad things. These are bad things that are happening to people. But unfortunately, that's not the reason we have the guns. The reason we have the guns and we need the guns is to defend ourselves from tyrannical government and from criminals.
But what's your base? So that's where I'm confused. Like, what's your basis for that? Where is it your interpretation that the Second Amendment is to protect citizens from a tyrannical government or to afford citizens the ability to overthrow a tyrannical government?
The Texas Revolution, I mean, like right there, like I'm sixth generation. We've been here since the
Well,
Revolution. We got to.
are you
defend
saying that
ourselves.
it's a moral right or it's a constitutional right? This is where I get confused because a lot of conservatives and Second Amendment, it's not a constitutional right. The Constitution forbids overthrowing the government, like in like half a dozen places, like treason, sedition, rebellion. They're expressly forbidden, and actually it empowers the government to suppress rebellions, insurrections, and sedition. So that's where I'm confused. Like if at least Scott, I'll say this for Scott, we disagree fundamentally, but he claims that the right of citizens to overthrow the government or to repel tyranny is a moral or natural right. He would never make the claim that it's constitutionally enshrined. I assume. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Scott, but. So the Constitution doesn't allow for it. The supreme law of the lands, to whatever extent you believe that the Constitution is, it doesn't allow for that. It doesn't empower citizens to overthrow the government. It's a myth.
Okay,
It expressly forbids it.
I think the truth is somewhere in between both of your statements. Actually, what I would say is that yes, you are correct that the Constitution is designed to give the state the power to have a monopoly on on certain aspects of the economy, on a republic, that it can suppress these revolutions, etc. But I would also say that ingrained in the philosophy of the writings of the founding fathers, part of the reason that the Second Amendment is there is so that if the government becomes overly tyrannical, that the populace does have the capacity and is not neutered from doing it. I mean, Thomas Jefferson's like one of his most famous quotes ever, right? Is that like the tree of liberty needs to be watered with the blood of patriots and tyrants alike, that it's its natural manure. Right. The idea being that, like, yeah, you should have guns. And if tyrants were to overthrow this or make this government, such an imposing figure that it became tyrannical, or they were to violate that Constitution, because I think if you brought any of the founding fathers here today and said, is this what you envisioned for the power and scope of the state? They would be like, why haven't you started killing these people? Right. So I think the truth is probably a little in between.
I mean, and I also want to go on the record saying, yeah, they set this up as a formation of government. Obviously, they have to have some provisions, so not every Joe Blow off the street can just go, "Hey, I'm president," and start shooting people. But they also, if you look at it, you mentioned Thomas Jefferson. Another quote from Thomas Jefferson, sometimes it's attributed to Sam Adams and Thomas Paine, is that when the government fears the people, there is liberty. When the people fear the government, there is tyranny, and that's kind of where I'm at on this. If we start taking away the ability for the citizenry to defend themselves because we want security in our day-to-day lives, then we're not going to have security whenever the government comes in and implements, some kind of draconian policy that's evil.
So much of this conversation has surrounded practicality and practical implementation of the solutions that are being presented. What do you think the practical component of you standing up against the government, against tyranny, looks like?
Afghanistan. Looks like the world's most powerful. I think it's the world's most powerful military attempting to control a country, and people with limited weaponry and resources being able to hold off for 20 years. I mean, Alexander the Great
I'm not asking you.
Had said, right, like there are only a couple of things you should fear, and the Lion of Afghanistan is one of them. Right.
I'm asking you. So from a moral standpoint, I understand where you're coming from, right? Like, you want to preserve that right by all means. I totally get that. I'm asking you what you think what do you think the scenario looks like where you are being tasked with standing up to the federal government and the U.S. Armed Forces? How do you see there being value in you being able to fight in that situation?
So how like sometimes conservatives will make the argument that like the death penalty is a deterrent, and then we'll have these arguments, and eventually we come to realize that the data shows that 25 years in prison or above, like really there's no added determinant right?
Diminishing returns.
Sorry,
yes.
right. There's
Deterrent.
diminishing returns.
Yeah.
Deterrence. I don't know why I kept saying determinant. I apologize. But regardless, right? It's a deterrent, right? When you have a well-armed population, it doesn't matter whether or not the state, right? Once it, brings out 100,000 fucking soldiers into an area and their advanced weaponry, whether or not they have the capacity to take it over. What matters is that there is tons of bad press. There's tons of economic downturn. The individuals that run it are afraid of losing their jobs, being voted out. There's the international community. There are all of these different things, right? That an armed population is more likely to put up some form of meaningful resistance. A great example of this is in Mexico currently, Tyranny, Mexico. Tyranny, Mexico is an environmentalist, indigenismo, anarchist community with a population of somewhere around 11,000, possibly 18,000. It depends on where it is, right? Now, they're illegal. Like their existence is illegal and they are like officially like a problem with the Mexican state. And yet Mexico trades with them and Mexico kind of leaves them the fuck alone. One, because they have more problems dealing with the cartel, but two, because they are an armed, sizable population and it's not worth it. Even though Mexico has the power to fucking bomb Tyranny, Mexico out of existence for daring to declare, fuck you, we're not your citizens, we don't pay your taxes, and we're doing whatever the hell we want to do, is that there is a deterrence there. So I think that a similar argument is made, especially once you come to the conclusion that occupying an armed population is very different than just killing an armed population. It's one thing for the United States government to decide we don't like Florida anymore, so we're going to bomb Florida out of existence. It's another thing going door to door while there's a resistance. I think France proved this during World War II, where they were able to ferret the Nazis by using dinner plates, and the Nazis would slow down their blitzkrieg just because they thought the dinner plates might be mines, right? Like you can do a lot more than you think with a small group of people in a population. When the invading country is too afraid to take that on.
$10 for fondue. I view the moral argument for the Second Amendment as the state gets authority from the people. It would mean the state should arm the public and the people should, as a culture, have the duty of protecting it. I want to get Anja's answer here. He mentioned in his opening mental health as one of the solutions. Do you have anything else? Any other things that you would implement aside from gun control?
Yeah, so I think a big issue with this is that I think it's a social issue and not necessarily just one that you can fix by getting rid of guns.
Can you elaborate on social issue? You think the violence in America, the rise in violence and increase in America is a social issue? Can you elaborate a little bit?
I think that as time has gone on, we're experiencing some insane shifts in our realities, right? A lot of social changes happening, a lot of like technological changes happening at a very, very rapid pace. And there are a lot of people out there that just probably can't exactly 100% cope with this properly. So through that, and the fact that we haven't really adjusted to these concepts very quickly as far as like policy and legislation, those are what I would rather focus on rather than trying to get rid of guns. I would rather create better infrastructure, better ways to deal with these new things coming up, maybe social failings that we're having. I think Fabian brought up about familial issues and stuff, maybe creating better infrastructure there, maybe giving people more options on allowing themselves to have more options for schooling, if that's what they choose. I think there are a lot of small things that you can do that would create huge changes to our culture and ourselves socially that would benefit us much, much more than taking away guns.
To the pro gun control side, right? Do you also consider this a social issue, like the rise in gun violence? Do you think that, and to what extent do you think this is a quote unquote social issue?
It is a partially social issue. I just think every time that the claim is made that we can't trace it back to guns, I look at every verifiable piece of information that we have on gun violence across the world, and I don't see how we can make that conclusion. Other countries have poverty. Other countries have all the same issues that we have. I don't understand how we're uniquely not equipped to deal with the changing world, or we're uniquely susceptible to mental health issues or uniquely susceptible to poverty or anything like that for us to be cultivating an atmosphere of, encouraging gun violence or mental health problems or anything like that. I just don't see it. I think that the problem is quite obviously raw numbers, per capita, whatever you want. The problem is uniquely American, and we have more than double the amount of firearms of the next closest country. We are blowing them out of the water. Saying that there are social issues that are components of this, there are things like that at play, I think is fair. I want to address those things. I want investment capital in poor areas. I want to focus on mental health. I want social programs. I want all those things. Scott hates me right now. I'm sorry. And that's totally fine. I just think that the most immediate overnight solution to reducing the 20 to 40,000 gun deaths that we have per year is removing the easiest way of inflicting this death.
So
it's just
what do you
obvious
think
to
the
me.
problem is in? What do you think the problem is in France? Because France
Elaborate.
is a much lower gun ownership than us, and yet they have higher per capita gun violence. So, like, what is uniquely a problem in France if it's not the guns? According to crimeresearch.org.
I haven't researched what goes on in France that would differentiate the two societies. I don't know.
What do you think? What do you think the problem is? And I'll repeat the question from earlier in the panel, right? Between 1970s America, right? In terms of talking about mass shootings and school shootings,
Yeah.
where guns were far more widely available in and near schools, where kids were taught how to fire firearms in schools, in the fight against communism, right? So they were better trained to use those firearms, and there was much more likely to have firearms near or around the schools, and yet there wasn't an issue.
I see where you're getting at. It just seems like a red herring to me because, again, I'm not attributing the gun violence problem purely to school shootings. It's not what I'm talking about in this conversation. So
Scott,
there's been an
is
increase in
France-
school shootings, absolutely. Probably copycat crimes. I mean, ever since Columbine, there's been a 300% increase in the rampancy of school shootings per year. Yeah, it's definitely a problem. I don't think that you can attribute it to there being less access to guns in schools now or something like that. If
We
anything,
attribute it to social media instead of guns.
oh well, I
No,
definitely think there's. I think it's guns, but I think that there's other components that influence that. Like I think that one common theme we see with some of these guys, I just care less about the mass shooting thing than a lot of liberals do, to be honest with you guys. But I think one common theme that you see is kind of access to internet getting radicalized in these weird like sectors of the internet, like 4chan and stuff like that. I don't know how I feel about being a proponent of internet censorship laws. I just think that there has to be some thought given to, to give Anja some credit here. The world is rapidly changing. We have access to information that 30 years ago, people would have never even thought they would have anywhere near the level of access to that they do now. And there's common elements of these school shooters becoming radicalized through their online presences.
I want to get the answer from Daedalus, or from Daedalus first, and then Pondering Politics. The social,
just super quick.
Oh.
Pondering and Kilo. What I was citing is gun deaths from mass shootings, and crimeresearch.org is in the Discord.
I'll check it out.
Not the number itself, but the deaths.
They can look at that while maybe Daedalus answers this. Daedalus, do you think the social component, do you think there is a social component? Do you think it is a major component? And what would you say to the argument that we need to tackle it from there rather than guns? Go ahead.
I absolutely think there's a social component to crime. There's a social component to a lot of things. Like we tried to divorce suicide from this earlier, and I don't think that works either. I think you have a lot of different factors that go into why we are experiencing violence in society, and you have a lot of avenues that we can pursue. In addition to more stringent gun control. So yes, absolutely, we should pursue things. We should pursue things like economic development. We should pursue more intervention in areas that have traditionally not seen significant government intervention to provide more resources. And these have to be very local, I think, problems too.
Where would that be? Where in America would you find areas that need more intervention and haven't had enough economic investment that are a particular issue in terms of crime and gun violence? And I can't think of any off the top of my head. Can you come up with like a city or a county or something?
There are plenty of places. Almost most of the major cities throughout the Midwest have significant issues with this. You have significant places where you have gun violence in St. Louis, for example.
So you're saying St. Louis specifically has gun violence issues, and they're underinvested compared to like the rest of the country in terms of like funds towards education? Because I mean, maybe you're right. I'd love to see the data on that. It's just usually when people talk about low socioeconomic status cities, you're almost always talking about where a lot of funds have gone to try and fix these problems, and those programs simply haven't worked.
Like Chicago and Detroit. Just to name
Would
two
you-
right there off the top of my head.
I'm
Any
just
urban
curious.
area is
are
going to
they
have
actually
it.
underinvested? Yeah.
You have some pretty significant underinvestment issues in St. Louis, Chicago,
So-
Detroit.
Highly.
Okay, so how are you defining underinvestment then? If like, do you just mean that it's not enough, despite the fact that money is being funneled from taxpayers into cities to presumably give people opportunities, but it's underinvested because there's an arbitrary, or maybe not, maybe you have data to back it up, a specific limit of investment that you deem to be appropriate? Because I just don't understand what you mean by underinvestment if money is going from other places to these places to give them opportunities and they're still struggling.
Well,
and failing.
let's give him a chance, Dados. Can you give us can you elaborate on this underinvestment? Specifically, you mentioned St. Louis. Can you which particular program or which particular aspect of this is not receiving the funds that you think it should?
So what I'm really trying to get at is we have local neighborhoods, St. Louis, Chicago. I come from Chicago, actually. So we have local neighborhoods where you have very significant high amounts of investment, and you have local neighborhoods, for example, in the south side of Chicago, where you don't see a lot of investment in things like schools. You don't see a lot of investment in businesses. You see food deserts. You see a lot of factors that create opportunities for crime. You have less crime where you have more economic success. So if we have areas that are less economically successful, those are places where we have opportunities to create more investment and create less crime.
So when you say that there's specific sectors, what you're saying is that local politicians are choosing to take whatever funds are designed to go to the high crime, high poverty areas and then intentionally funneling them to other neighborhoods and intentionally creating food deserts and things like that. Dog, you should write that up and get it to the New York Times, because that sounds like some amazing investigative journalism on corruption of politicians, almost like, the state has a problem.
I want to jump in and
Not
say,
what I'm getting at.
well, if you look at places like San Francisco,
you
for
getting at?
example, these laws, like the gun laws and the making people not able to fight back if someone robs you, they're actually creating more economic disparity as businesses flee because they're worried about people coming in and just wholesale robbing their store. I mean,
That's
you see
not-
a video every
I'm not denying that can be potentially a component of it, but that's pretty bad faith to say that that's the reason why people are impoverished in San Francisco.
I can think of like 3 or 4 anecdotal examples just from Seattle after the chop, with friends of mine, family moved, owned businesses in that area and moved, and now those businesses are gone. So, I mean, I know that's an anecdotal example, and those are not like overall, can't speak to everything, but like, if a business is destroyed or it's robbed until they're losing money, it's going to hurt it economically. It causes all
The
the
number
problems.
one reason why businesses move away from coastal cities like that is because of property values and tax rates. It's
Which
not.
are tied to what? Crime rates? Does that have any effect on that?
You think crime rates make those property values go up?
Down. They make them go down. So whenever
No.
you're taking away people's
No.
ability to defend themselves,
They
in
are
their
leaving
stores,
because it's too expensive
Yeah.
to stay there. Okay,
I mean, that's part of it.
Scott. No, that's the biggest reason. I'm just telling you that's the number one reason. Okay, Scott.
Yeah, but that's a kind of an irrelevant statistic, right? Like, it's like, why do
It's not related to what
80%
we're
of
talking about, it
restaurants
just-
fail in their first year, right?
That's
Like,
fine. It's just not-
obviously, crime is a disincentive towards business. Obviously, it will lower your property values, which will in turn lower your rent costs and lower the amount of taxes that you pay. But
That's not what's happening in these coastal
it
cities.
it also lowers the amount of the amount of potential profit that you can make in a community as well. If a community is ridden with poverty and crime, you don't make money there.
Yeah, there's not as much capital in the area. I get it. I'm just saying it's not the number one reason is not because of crime.
But it's
There's a
a major
variety of
reason.
other factors.
It's
I
a
think it's
major
a
contributing factor.
small component.
Yeah, it just seems
and
like an irrelevant statistic
Yeah.
to combat an irrelevant statistic that he admitted was anecdotal. I
It's
don't
kind
know.
of a chicken and the egg
Yeah.
thing either way. I don't
And-
know where you can say it begins and ends. But Scott, I looked
Yeah.
up. Did you say gun violence rates were higher in France than in the United States?
the death rates from gun violence in France. It's in the data that I linked you. There's a chart.
I have numbers that refute. This is my problem with these kinds of conversations. We can both find numbers that support something different. My numbers, it's not even close.
I mean, there are lies, damn lies, and then there's statistics, which is why consequentialism and taking people's rights away is a fucking problem.
Okay.
Which is my original.
I wanna.
And you admit it.
I want to give Pondering a chance to answer the social aspect of these things, right? Because I did ask that.
I think that Kilo and Daedalus basically covered it.
Okay,
I think that's a multivariate problem. I think that everybody here made a compelling case that there's clearly a social and quote unquote cultural component. Like you compare, what is it like? Doesn't Switzerland have like a higher or a comparable rate of gun ownership in the United States, or excuse me,
Way
compared
higher.
to the United States?
It's higher, yeah.
And considerably lower gun violence, right? But if you look at it, I mean, the number one.
Oh,
like,
wait, I'm sorry.
Some
It's not
grenade attacks, though.
Wait.
Way
It's
more
not higher
grenade
per
attacks.
capita. I don't think that's true.
Okay, just real quick,
It's a close-
I hate to interrupt you, but
It's
thank
the
you
closest
for
of developed nations to us. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for the gift subs, gang. Thank you for the super chats. This is the last stream of the month, so if you want to help me get over the hump here and pay my bills, super chat, gift subs, all those things very much would help. Okay,
guys,
fair
remember, if we get Wick to 5,000 subs, Scott has
5,000.
declared
Okay,
that he
when
will
we get to
vote for
5,000
President Biden in
subs,
2024. You heard it here first,
I don't know
people.
what I'd
You
do,
heard it
but-
here first.
Okay,
But no, I do think they
go
made
on.
a compelling case here because again, like you look at Switzerland and you know, like they have like what's it called? It's not the draft, but like not even selective service. It's like mandatory military service. So most of their adult population is trained in the use of firearms. It's where most people get their guns. They look at like there's recreational shooting that's extremely common there. It's sportsmanship, but they don't have. You know, this isn't a nation that was birthed in like an armed revolt against Great Britain, right? So like we have just had like this wild west mentality associated with guns that is clearly like socially reinforced. So yeah, and then of course
Also,
you go ahead.
I don't mean to interject. I apologize. I just want to briefly mention. I think that I can find more numbers about this. USA, I think everyone agrees, does blow the rest of the world out of the water in terms of gun ownership. Switzerland does not own more guns per capita than we do. I have the difference being first for the USA and 18th for Switzerland. What we're comparing is their gun laws, their accessibility and restrictions and all that kind of stuff. That's what's very, very comparable.
They have much tighter controls in Switzerland than we do here too.
Okay.
I don't know if that's true, but
Sure. Let me ask this. So Kilo, you've already said you wanted to remove all guns, but for the other two on the pro gun control side, do you think there is any value in allowing private citizenry to own guns, and what level of that would you allow?
I'm finding other data. I'm finding data in the opposite direction too.
Well, again, you
The
guys
data
can go
wars
back and forth
begins.
on this data all day. I think that it's almost like a circle the drain thing. I don't think we're going to get anywhere with that, and I want to kind of keep this conceptual a little bit too. So go ahead. Like,
So I'll speak.
yeah,
I mean, I'll buy Daedalus sometime. But like,
and Testicle Johnson for $2. The Second Amendment sucks ash /Wick. So okay.
So here's the thing. So this is part of the problem. This is where again I'm really sympathetic to Anja or whatever. Just like looking at practical policy because I don't have like an inherent absolute objection morally to the Second Amendment. I grew up in a red state. I live in a red state. Most of my family members own guns. I've fired guns before. Responsible gun. Say what?
Do you own a gun?
I do not. No.
Do you own a gun, Kilo? Just real quick. Do you own a gun, Kilo?
Can I get your address after this? I'm looking for a good place.
All right, so check your DMs. Check your DMs,
do you own a gun?
Appreciate
Not
it.
currently. I have in the past.
Okay, fair enough. Carry on. I'm just curious.
But I also like knowing, and this is what I've told people before when I've had these conversations, I also like knowing that if I ever felt the need to own a gun, if I ever felt either for recreation or self-defense, that I have the right to do it relatively easy here in the United States. So it's not like I have a moral objection to it. But again, I guess I look at the Second Amendment like most other rights, including free speech and religion and assembly and whatever, that there are certain constraints and restrictions I think that the government has a right to impose. And given the rate of gun violence, and yes, I understand that mass shootings are a relative minority in terms of the gun violence we experience, I think that the problem is pervasive enough that the government has a moral right, the constitutional right, to attempt legislation to curtail this, even if it's clumsy, even if it doesn't work, even if we have to repeal it and then try something else later. and is going so far as to just take guns away from everybody. Number one, we can't do it. It's not feasible. But even if we could, I guess I would hesitate to do it, and some of the reasons that Scott identified too, because you'd almost have to disarm the planet because guns would find their way in across borders as well. So I wish I could say for performative sake that, fuck yeah, get rid of the Second Amendment, just burn it all to the ground. But I can't. And I am open to arguments either way. Like, I think 𝕾𝖏 could probably try to make a compelling case for Second Amendment abolition.
If you let me talk long enough, I promise.
Okay, well, we don't have time for that.
But Scott would be the little devil, the little libertarian devil on my shoulder, trying to like refute you.
Oh,
so
yes. The evil freedom
I want to
and
give
rights.
I want to give Daedalus a chance to answer this question as well. Daedalus, what level of gun ownership are you okay with for private citizens?
So I'm not inherently opposed to gun ownership on its face. I think if a person is capable of responsibly handling a weapon, then they absolutely should have that right. However, the problem is that we don't socially seem to be at that point. And I also acknowledge that at this point, gun control is probably a ship that's sailed. We have about 46% on estimates of private ownership of weapons here in the United States. It's probably a ship that's sailed. So, and I'm not opposed to people owning weapons recreationally. I do not see a practical application. My background is military history, and I do not see a practical application of a widespread militia system that was originally envisioned in the Constitution. It's over and done with.
Okay.
It's been done with since the 70s and the institution of the all-volunteer military force.
Can I ask Daedalus a question real
Yes,
quick?
please.
So Daedalus, again, I think there's some commonality there. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say that the ship has sailed necessarily on gun control. I probably have a bit more optimism than you. But let me ask you this. It's kind of like a question I asked Anjas earlier. Even if you agree that there's, at the bare minimum, that gun control would not be a panacea, do you think that government has both the legal right and moral obligation to try to pass common sense or logical or efficacious, good faith, whatever you want to do, like make a sincere, good faith effort to try to pass gun control legislation, even if you don't think it would have the intended effect?
I mean, yeah. Even a constitutional amendment is not necessarily permanent. We had prohibition in the 20s and ended up repealing that. So, like, I think there's room without necessarily giving away the farm to try some kind of method of government control.
Okay. A question for the whole panel. The last question, then we'll get to closings. I want to respect everyone's time, but I'm curious, and this might spark a little discussion. Okay. I think everyone's okay for gun use and self-defense here. Like, no problem with that. Am I wrong? Pretty much everyone's okay. If you're threatened, you can pull out a gun. Okay. Question: do you think it's okay to shoot someone who comes into your home that was uninvited and intends, or you believe is intent, to rob the place? Do you think it's okay to shoot them dead?
Does anybody disagree with that? I mean, it's a pretty common sense thing.
Okay.
I mean, I mentioned earlier, Thomas Jefferson's influence of John Locke. I think John Locke solved this problem. And again, like I said, via utilitarianism, but trying to use that as a means to discover natural law. In his second treatise on government, he describes the thief in the night as putting himself in a state of war. Right? When an individual comes in your home in the middle of the night, they've declared war on you and your family because you don't know what their intentions are, and you have no reason to trust their intentions because they've broken into your home. The only way you can trust their intentions is if they leave your home, they're safely away, right? And they've paid some form of restitution. And so at that point, you're perfectly within your rights.
Hey, they've escaped your home.
Kill this person.
Okay, they come in, they rob you. They're running out with all your stuff. Can you shoot them?
As they're running away with all of your stuff, I would say
with your money or your wallet and things, right?
I would say you get into a tricky position there. I would need more context.
Do you shoot them in the back? That's the context.
Well,
you woke up.
I live in the state of Virginia. I'm not stupid enough to go to prison.
They got you. They got your wallet. They got a bunch of your valuables, and they got them in both arms, and they're just
Scott, they have that framed
Moving
picture of
away,
me hanging
right?
above your bed, and they're running out of the house. Do you shoot them in the back?
Oof, man, I mean, when you take my beat off material away from me, it becomes a difficult.
I'm actually
conversation
with
for me to
Scott
behave.
on this one. Like, so that's where I was kind of grimacing with the initial hypothetical, because I guess if a person breaks into the house, I don't know their intention. I have. It's not like, so I actually had a DoorDash delivery guy who was supposed to go to my neighbor. I left my door unlocked, and he walked in. When he knocked on the door, he went to put down.
Good
And then
thing
he's
you
like, "Oh,
didn't own
wrong
a gun.
house."
Bam, 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 bam. Right,
Right. Obviously not.
Lit him
But
up.
like in the hypothetical where I have strong reason to believe that they're either here to rob me or hurt me, then yeah, I probably wouldn't quibble at all over a person, exercising self-defense with a gun. But in a situation the second hypothetical where they've already robbed me and they're leaving, no, I don't think that a person should shoot somebody in the back even if they steal your shit.
Hold on, y'all
I
been
think the
making
problem here
arguments
is
all
the
day about
difference
the greater
between
good.
should. The difference is between should and do you have a right to, right? When under the premise of should, that's a personal moral preference that I probably wouldn't shoot that person. Do you have a right to defend your property and shoot them in the back if they refuse to drop your property and leave? I would
Okay,
say
do you have- okay.
absolutely have that right to shoot
well,
that person.
Well, then why did you hesitate, or was it because WhickTV should?
Because he should. I don't like.
Okay,
Okay,
okay.
well, let me
okay.
clarify the question. Let me clarify the
Gotcha.
question so we don't have this problem. Should someone who does this be arrested and go to jail for it?
Absolutely not. They have every right to defend their
It's a
property.
legal and
if
a
someone
moral
is stealing
question.
their property.
Legally, I think probably not. I wouldn't shoot anyone in the back.
Okay.
Yeah, but in the state of Virginia, I can't do that.
You
Fair
can't
enough.
shoot someone in the back in Virginia. I just for Gibbs, I think you're about to touch on this a second ago. You said that we've been making arguments in support of the greater good all day. I don't think that my property is more morally, worthy of consideration than someone else's life. So, if someone enters my home, yeah, I mean, it's a last resort for me to try to. I think I'd actually probably, assuming that I have the proper training to feel confident enough doing this, I would probably try to incapacitate them first before I try to shoot them in the brain or something like that. I definitely would not shoot someone in the back. My stuff's insured. I can get it back. I wouldn't want to live for the rest of my life knowing that I ended someone else's life.
Or die in the process.
You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
right.
I
Yeah.
would take a different stance. I think you're morally obligated to shoot them in the back because we sat here
Obligated?
obligated. I'm going to tell you why. Because you're not only that, finish them off if you can, but I'm saying if you're sitting here and you're going, oh, we're talking about the greater good. This person's clearly a criminal. They're clearly breaking in. They're clearly causing damage. They could be potential harm to other people. Let's get them off the streets.
So
Let's get-
obligated,
criminals-
you would
wait,
say
all
that someone who
criminals deserve
does
to
not. No,
die?
stop. I want to be clear on this. You would say, right, that someone who does not shoot someone running away with their stuff in the back to kill them is doing a moral wrong.
Yes, you're enabling crime to continue and perpetrating bad things. But let's get the criminals off the streets.
Okay, I just want to
Let's
say
defend
this,
ourselves.
Gibbs. You seem like a nice guy. I've enjoyed our conversation. The idea that criminals, just because for the virtue of being a criminal, all deserve to die is
I didn't
insane
say they
to
all
me.
deserve to die. I'm saying that if you're going to sit here and defend yourself, you have a moral obligation to shoot to kill. Like, let's not shoot this guy and maim him
You're
and
saying
have a terrible life. for the
you
rest of
saying I have a moral obligation to shoot another human being for taking my stuff is kind of reprehensible to me.
so
No,
what's
what's
better?
reprehensible is that you don't agree with him, right?
Yeah,
If you agree with you literally are the person that sits here and says, I do not care about fundamental human rights so long as my analysis of the consequences leads to what I believe to be the greater good. And he gives you a scenario where he says, if you do not stop this person that is a criminal, they are likely to harm and other people, and you're letting that happen because of your personal
No.
history.
You're saying
they're
letting
arrested,
that happen.
bullshit.
Do you
even
think
if they're
I
arrested, you're still causing a net negative because now the government has to take taxpayer
this is
dollars.
this
to
is
provide for
cognitive
a
what are we
criminal.
paying them for, Gibbs? No. To say I would let it happen is super disingenuous. What am I doing to try to I just said I would use the firearm in my own home as an absolute last resort. I definitely wouldn't shoot someone in the back, but I'm immediately calling the police. I'm immediately giving them a description. I'm writing it down if I can in my phone, what they look like, what they were wearing, everything. I want that person apprehended. Absolutely. I want my stuff
Yeah, but
back if possible.
you're not You're not engaging with it. What you're doing is just adding unnecessary context about other actions.
How is that not engaging? What are you
Close
talking about?
to the thing. No, what I'm saying is that your argument is that gun control is good because it leads to moral preferences that you have, which is life potentially, less shootings, less crime, etc., based off of your utilitarian calculus.
I'm not a utilitarian, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, but that's the process you're using, even if you're not a utilitarian. Like, you could even be like, I mean, if you want to come back with a particularist argument, like, I'm willing to hear it. If that's what you are, I still think it's wrong. But nevertheless, he then gives you and reverses your own logic in the exact same scenario by saying it is okay to take someone's life, their liberty, their property, right? So long as the consequences lead to a better and safer outcome for everyone involved, which would be killing the criminal.
I explained my moral framework.
That's morally, but you say that's morally reprehensible, but he's using the same logic you're using.
It's morally reprehensible because of the scale that we're using.
Stop. I want to give Anja a chance because we only have a couple more minutes. He hasn't had a lot of speaking time, so I want to give him the chance. Then what we're going to do is we're going to have closing statements, and then I'm going to open up the panel. And if people want to come on, and if you all want to stay, because I want to address this question, I want to address Gibbs. Gibbs, please stay. I have some questions for you.
And Daedalus said, Daedalus looked like he wanted to also speak.
I'll go ahead.
I'll throw in some on the
end. So, Anja, Daedalus, then we're going to go to closings. Cool? Cool. Anja, go ahead.
So as far as the shooting somebody in the back as they're running away thing, I think that obviously legally you get into a lot of hot water in those sorts of scenarios. There's no self-defense argument there, or really trying to protect property, really even. But I think one of the conversations we're having right now is if property itself could have similar or same value as a human life. And I think when we get to these conversations, especially with people on the left, I'm on the left, so I'm saying that this gets complicated for us. A lot of our worldview on things like abortion, brings into question how much we view the sanctity of life. So I have to think, are you saying that there's no such scenario in which property can be as equal value as somebody's life if it is very important? And if you lose that property, it could have detrimental consequences to your way of life?
Property is inseparable from a human's life.
Okay.
God, I'd love to talk to you about this someday. You and I are very far apart on this.
It's going to go to open, so if you guys can stay for that, we can probably get into that because this bears on the Gibbs statement. But I want to give Daedalus last thoughts. Go ahead.
So my grandfather had a pretty elegant solution to the first problem. He kept a .38 special. And the first round was a full metal jacket because he figured he was going to fire it into the wall and try to scare the guy off. The second round was a hollow point because he figured if he's going to fire into the wall, he might as well have a small hole to patch instead of a big one. As for shooting someone in the back, I don't think I would take that step.
Okay. Gang, it has been an interesting discussion. I have enjoyed it immensely. If you are watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you are on Twitch, hit that follow button. To the Scots community, thanks for not making us mod you a lot, right? You've been pretty well behaved, so I appreciate that.
The community's great. Fuck off.
No. You're welcome anytime. But please consider following the channel if you have not yet. We have these discussions all the time. And yeah, so let's get closing statements. Tell people where they can find you. You've all been great guests. I've appreciated having every single one of you on. So yes, thanks for making this easy for me.
Real quick, can you ask Admiral Gibbs to put on his Mando helmet for his closing statement? Because I mean, there's just I see it looming there in the background.
Maybe if we get 5 subs in chat right now, 5 subs in chat, and he'll do it, gang. I promise you. I will make him. I will use coercive force and pressure the state.
Capitalist. I'm definitely down for that.
Okay, sweet. But Anja, we're gonna start with you. Give us your closing and give us where we can find you. Go ahead.
So you guys can find me at @𝕾𝖎𝖎 on Twitter. I don't really stream much anymore, so there's really no point in me giving you my Twitch. But I'll say, for me personally, this conversation has been interesting. There's a lot of wildly different perspectives. I think I have very different reasons of why I believe gun rights are important versus the other people that were on my side. But I just think overall, yeah, I mean, we were kind of all over the place. I think that there were a lot of questions that didn't necessarily get answered. It's kind of the nature of these things, but it's a conversation that's important and is worth happening. And I just think it's fucking fantastic that you guys came out here and took place in this conversation. I mean, it's important for us to have these conversations. So.
Okay, we got one sub for the we're gonna go to you last, Gibbs, because we're gonna give people time. So we got one sub towards the hat. We need 4 more, gang. Fabian Liberty Scott, give us your closing.
Yeah, I'm Fabian Liberty pretty much everywhere. Twitter, Twitch, Rumble, YouTube. I want to read this statement because I spent an hour writing it. So I'm going to read this statement. I had 2 prepared. This is kind of a mixture of the 2 that I've been fucking with. So regardless, I'll just spit it out and then I'll shut the fuck up. Since 1789, the Constitution has been the enshrined and incomplete philosophy of the United States. Our founding fathers established this nation in the name of liberty and Enlightenment values, perhaps at the peak of their instantiation. One fundamental right they realized was that of self-defense and the arms necessary for it. The Second Amendment was designed to establish this human right as unquestionable. The amendment forbids the federal government from infringing on the rights of citizens to have any weapons the military uses and enshrines the right of private militia. This is further proven in the actions of Madison in the War of 1812, as well as a slew of comments from the founding fathers. They knew it was our civic duty to assassinate authoritarian governments that infringe on our liberties. Private property and the right of self-defense are human rights. Enlightenment liberalism was discovering these rights through convergence and utilitarian analysis while exploring and challenging natural law perspectives. The influence of Locke, for example, is painfully obvious in Thomas Jefferson's first draft of the Declaration of Independence, where he references that all men have an inalienable rights to life, liberty, and property. Unfortunately, founding fathers made a mistake. They were incapable of grounding these rights as objective facts they are. They did not foresee that so many fellow Americans would abandon liberty in support of tyranny. They did not see the degradation of the dominant philosophy that would sweep our nation as utilitarianism's weak foundations are subverted by future evil philosophies. Proponents of gun control are this evil. Unlike the Enlightenment philosophers who were searching for truth through the scientific method, these by and large neophytes inherited the dialectic, searching instead to confirm their histrionic and Gnostic beliefs. They will reference the science, the data, and attempt to argue that human rights may be stripped from you. They will argue that they can violate human rights because the data shows a universally preferred outcome. Never mind that this data is inherently soft science, usually conducted by ideologically captured public health experts, while conflicting data from behavioral economists will be discounted. At best, it establishes a historical fact that is unable to draw causation, and at worst, the methodology is laughable. Last 2 sentences. The necessity for this debate is due to the founding fathers not going far enough and instead instituting a liberal democracy. They hoped for a people to continue down the path of enlightenment they set forward. Instead, we are living in the shadows of giants whose shoulders we refuse to climb atop. In this, they are blameless, for the discoveries of natural law were incomplete. But for those who support gun control, they deserve nothing but derision and mockery for the specious, contemptible arguments they forward.
Goddamn. Okay. Next, Fabian, please. Or not Fabian. Oh, no, please. Pondering politics. Pondering politics.
So Scott was muted the entire time. I don't know if he knows that, but I didn't hear.
You were absolutely not. Please, we got it the first time. It's good. And thank you for the sub, Parallax. If we get one more individual donor, we go to Hype Train, and we can wick out while they're giving their closing statements. Go ahead.
So I'm Josiah, aka Pondering Politics on YouTube. One word, YouTube/Pondering Politics. I am a devout progressive and lefty, strong anti-Republican, and by Republican I do mean the Republican Party. Yeah, this conversation, it was fun. It definitely didn't go the way I thought it was. It was kind of schizo and scattershot, as Anja said. For me personally, look, I don't claim to have all the answers. I think this is extremely complicated. There are huge gaps in research. There's huge gaps in evidence as far as best practices are concerned. I don't think that the Second Amendment has been properly contextualized since the 2008 Heller case. I think we need to return to the pre-Heller interpretation of the Constitution. It does not enshrine or enable or encourage citizens to overthrow the government. That's nowhere to be found in the Constitution. It's expressly forbidden. And I think that the government has a legal right and moral obligation, given the disproportionately ridiculous rate of gun violence, which includes mass shootings, but also other things as well. It has a legal right and a moral obligation to try to address this via legislation, even if the legislation is incomplete, even if it's not completely efficacious. We can repeal what doesn't work and try something else. We just have an obligation to try to bring a better outcome for the United States, for our children, and for future generations. I am open to all kinds of arguments, from security to buyback options to, again, background checks, red flag laws. I do think that the research needs to be more comprehensive. We need to repeal the Dickey Amendment. The CDC needs to get involved. But yeah, I just want to basically return to the time when we all recognize that the Second Amendment was not absolute, it was not unlimited, and we have a right to constrain it as much as necessary. So that's me, Josiah Pondering Politics.
I appreciate
and remember, if we get WhickTV to 5,000 subscribers,
well,
Scott's going to vote for President Biden.
We are on a hype train now. Thank you for the Prime sub, the gifted subs. Give me more. Again, it's the end of the month. I want to feed my family. I want to feed myself. I want to feed my puppy. Right, so more is better.
Did we get the subs for him to put the helmet on with?
Right,
Did we get
not
the subs?
yet. We need two more subs, and he gets a helmet on. So we got 2 more people to give closing statements. That's the time you have to give me 2 more subs. Okay, please, Kilo. Let's try to make it a little more concise.
Yeah, concise. My name's Kilo the Giant. You can call me Kilo. I don't have a channel, but you can find me in Discord, Reddit, various Discord communities, Twitter for sure. Yeah, I loved this conversation. Super interesting. There's just the only problem we have is that there's a philosophical way to approach it, then there's kind of a moral way to approach it, and then there's like a legal way to approach it, and then there's like a practical statistical element that no one can really agree on. It makes it a little bit jumbled and kind of hard to really pin down exactly how we feel about it individually. I can tell you that my philosophy, which is overarching and affects all of my political ideologies, is that human life is the most important thing. It's paramount over everything else. I'm anti-harm. I'm anti-death. I think that any way that we can implement legislature that will mitigate or address some of the violence, the harm, the deaths that are being inflicted with firearms is worth exploring, if not outright implementing as immediately as possible.
Thank you for being here. I really appreciate you. Yes, next up, Daedalus. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah. I want to, first of all, thank everybody for showing up and thank Wick for having me. My name is 𝕻𝖎𝖎. I am one of the co-hosts of the new Two Guys Talking History show over on YouTube. You can find us there. We have a big green T temporarily until we get, some art. And I just want to, again, thank everybody. And my dog's about ready to jump me, so probably time to get going.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here, my friend. And have a good one, buddy. Okay. Last, and we didn't make it. I'm sorry, gang. We needed 2 more subs and we didn't get it, but that's okay. Admiral Gibbs, take it away.
Yeah, so I'm Admiral Gibbs. You can find me on pretty much every platform as Admiral Gibbs or Admiral_Gibbs. It's real simple stuff. In closing, you need guns to save you from the government. And that's really all that matters.
Okay. Thank you all for being here. Once again, like, subscribe, follow. We are going to open it up now for those of you who wish to stay. If you need to leave, I understand, right? But for those of you who wish to stay, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about Gibbs' statement, right? That not only is it okay to shoot the running, fleeing robber, but you have a moral imperative to do so. And not to do so means you have done a moral wrong. And I want to talk about the property versus life discussion, right? What property is worth a life? Is there any, right? And to what extent? Yeah, so we're going to be talking about that. If you want in, join the Discord. Accept the rules. Jump backstage. And I will give you the link. Or one of my mods, please. If you're in the chat, please provide the link in the Discord. So !Discord will give you that, and you can jump backstage. So.
All right.
See you later, Daedalus, and we got some.
Bye, Daedalus.
Yeah, we
Bye,
got
Daedalus.
we got an individual right now.
Have a good night.
Willing to come in. Hello, you're live.
I'm going to use the restroom, but I'll stick around for, 15, 20 minutes or so.
Sure. Yeah, we'll see if anyone's
Leave your
interested
mic
in
on.
this, or is it just me? So, while he's getting ready, right, while Ranger and Rogue is getting his stuff prepped, I want to talk to you a little bit, Gibbs, because I have some issues with what you just said. Do you think that criminals, specifically thieves, should be executed?
I mean, As far as like, okay, I think there's two things here.
Yes or no? Do you think that criminals, someone who steals, so say I miss, say I'm shooting at them and I miss, but the cops catch them, should they then execute them?
Probably not. No.
Why not? So what's the difference, right? What's the difference between so if the cops shouldn't be killing this person, right? Why should I?
Well, I'm going to say it's twofold. One, from the moralist standpoint that I was taking earlier, and two, from the legal standpoint that I will argue right this second, and then we come back to the other one. One, first of all, like if I'm sitting here and I'm shooting someone and I miss, or I hit them and I maim them, and then whatever happens and they go to jail. For now they're like legal systems supporting this person. They have to pay for their meals, et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, you're doing us all a favor by just finishing them off, really. And secondly, we're sitting here, if we're looking at like from the moralist standpoint, this person's probably going to cause harm again. What is it? What's the statistics on repeat offenders looking like? It's outrageously high.
Okay, I
Well,
understand.
I don't think it's the government's job to like execute all these people because
But
match the crime.
none of those variables that you just mentioned for reasons why you should shoot someone in the back that is stolen from you change if it's cops that catch them, right? None of those variables change.
I think it inherently does because less government is better.
How does it inherently change?
It's you're defending your stuff, right? And then there's consequences. Like, say if this person lives and you shoot them not to kill, they are very easily able to be sued in civil court. Like, that is a substantial issue at a like individual level, right? That we've kind of not really touched on at all, But if we're gonna sit here and say, okay, what's the difference between a cop and a regular person doing it? The other thing is the cops. They're trained to like come in here and de-escalate situations and catch these criminals so they can implement the government's form of justice. That's kind of their job, right? As opposed to the individual citizen whose job is basically defend my stuff.
Wick, can I challenge him on this?
Please do.
Okay, Gibbs. If it is your moral obligation to try to prevent the criminal from potentially inflicting harm on anyone else by ending their life, why is it not the moral obligation of the institution that you fund to do the same thing?
I mean, at some level it is. At some level it is their job, right? However,
so you are advocating for execution for criminals just across the board.
I mean, not across the board, but I think for more
for
crimes
thieves,
currently
at least,
executed.
right?
I mean, no, not necessarily thieves. I mean, I guess I would probably put like some kind of limit on what their cost of like however much they stole, I guess, before they're executed. But I mean, that's all
how much?
arbitrary.
What's the amount? Can you ballpark it for me?
I mean, yeah, so that's all becoming arbitrary. So, I mean, you know what? Just for the sake of argument and ease, yeah, I'll say we should be executing a lot more criminals, and that could include thieves.
Okay. Go continue to deal with it if you wish, Kilo, or anyone else wants to jump in. Does it?
Go ahead, Scott.
I think you're fundamentally wrong, but I think it's because you're touching on something that I think you intuit, and you don't have a descriptive legal philosophy to figure out the ins and outs of what is objective. Except, and I'm going to give you the right one, right? I'm going to give you the one that actually exists.
I have one. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So are you familiar with the principle of estoppel in law, in common law theory?
Go ahead. Just go ahead and explain it.
Oh, yeah. So estoppel is the idea that one cannot argue that something not be done to them or argue their innocence if their actions are proved to be that against what it is that they're saying, right? Or against their previous statements. You can recant previous statements. So, for example, if you are convicted, let's say, of drinking and driving, right? And then you get caught drinking and driving a second time in court, then you can't say, well, I've never drunk and drive, right? Because in a court of law, it's like, no, we've literally proven that you do engage in drinking and driving. Therefore, you can't argue that this is something that you don't do or that you've never done. You're stopped from being able to make that argument. Now, when you take that into natural law philosophy and you bring that into who is and isn't an inherent aggressor, what occurs is whether or not someone can argue for their own rights, whether or not they can argue that something not be done to them. So, for example, if I point a gun at you and I shoot you and I kill you, and your wife says, "I want justice," whatever your feelings on are about what that justice means, I can't argue that any of those things that she wants done to me not be done to me, Because in order to pay restitution, in order to actually be able to argue that I have a right to my life, to her, the victim, right? Your wife or whatever, presumably. I don't know if you're married or whatever. Doesn't matter, right? I can't argue for those rights. And the reason is because let's say there was a machine, and if I step into this machine, it would kill me, but it would bring you back to life. There's no logical argument that I could make that I shouldn't be forced to step in that machine to give you your life back. That's restitution. So in the case of someone breaking into your house, right, I would say that the idea that like, oh, well, life's not more inherently valuable than your property is bullshit, because your property, your home, your safety, all of these things are important to you. They're in a state of war. You have a right to kill this person, and they can't argue that they have their rights given back to them until they return their stolen property and repay you for the damages.
Yeah, but
the
his
problem is
argument.
that I think you're taking it too far.
But let me
You're
also.
you're taking it too far, but I think it's because you're intuiting that there's something wrong
No.
with this idea.
I want to just let's clarify a little bit. Part of what I argued when I said that
Mhm.
is if we're sitting here, we're looking at the greater good, right? Overall, right? We're sitting here, then I would argue that you're morally inclined to finish them, because this is going to solve you for a greater portion of society is now not going to suffer either from the government having to fund this person's prison or from this person harming other people in the future. Then you can't not argue that by deleting this person, then it's not going to be better for everybody.
Yes, I
Like
can.
that-
Yes, I can. And
Well,
this is
that's
see, this is the problem, and this is why I call Republicans family value consequentialists, because I can apply the same logic to you that I would to any leftist, right? You don't know the future. There are plenty of people that have been gangbangers that have gone to jail and have reformed in jail, found Christ, and have actually reduced gang violence by talking to former gang members, by doing community outreach, et cetera, et cetera. You don't actually know what the outcome of the future actions of this person are. The only thing that
that's
you're aware
exactly
of
my
is what
point.
has already occurred.
Scott is
Right.
exactly correct, and a fundamental tenet of my moral system is that there is no one that is irredeemable. You are completely taking matters into your own hands and ignoring everything. You're flying in the face of everything that I know to be true about the universe. That's why I said it's morally reprehensible within my framework. Obviously, we're different. We just disagree. I'm just saying
Yeah.
within my framework, this
No-
is a
no
morally
one-
reprehensible position to take.
Right.
No one is beyond redemption. And at the same time, it's not a logical argument. But Hitler cannot make a logical argument that he not be killed. He can't logically argue that, not after committing a genocide.
Oh no, it's a pathos thing. There is no logical argument.
I wanna
in any of
give,
this.
I would argue in a lot of the what ifs.
Yeah, I want to give some of the new folks a chance.
I'm-
Some of the
I'm just saying we know this
Please.
person has done X.
Sure.
We might as well, defend ourselves.
What do you think? And I'll ask the same question I asked to Gibbs to prompt that answer. And to Casimir, is that how you say your name, Casimir? And to Ranger and Rogue. Someone steals from you, right? They break into your house in the middle of the night. They take your stuff, and then they start booking it, right? They've taken your stuff. They got a sizable portion, right? Like your wallet, like your social security, maybe some expensive mementos, whatever, right? A good amount of your income that you would suffer without. Can you shoot them in the back and kill them? Is that justified? Should you be arrested if you do this, right?
I was just jumping on because I had a question just for Ruminate, but
Oh well,
You
we
can
can
go,
get once he
I
gets
just don't
back.
want to derail
he's-
right now. Yeah,
He's gone right now. Okay, Casimir, what do you think?
Scott just gave you the perfect answer. I would say that the only thing you can change to justify the shooting is if the robber was armed. So if somebody barges into your home, threatens you with a gun, at that moment they have forfeited their life.
But without a
Yeah,
gun,
yeah.
you say that someone who is robbing you should not be shot, and you should go to jail if you do so. That's your argument?
I think that you could potentially argue that there is an argument in our current law that if you that the only way for you to legally be on a property without constituting a threat is to do so during daylight, to come through the passage that's marked, to come to the front door where there's the entrance to the house, and then to ring the bell and politely request admission, and then you get trespassed. If you're told to leave, you have to leave. Now, if you don't follow this, for example, if you show up in 4 a.m., which is considered not a common visiting time, and if you show up through the back door, right, which is not a common visiting place, then the person can shoot you in the moment because they don't have to verify that you're not a lethal threat. It's considered in our society a lethal threat to visit somebody in such a time. However, in your scenario, the person is not a lethal threat anymore. Clearly, he's running away. Therefore, since you know that it's not a lethal threat, you just have to chase them.
Okay, what do we think? You guys want to argue about this or no? Or do you think this is kind of cut and dry?
I'm gonna have to go here in a few minutes. So I was here, but I heard the Ranger and Rogue had a question for me.
If you have a quick question, go ahead, Ranger.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Like, what's you asked on your solution to gun violence? One of your first response was a universal background check. What does that mean to you?
So I think instituted at a federal level, all 50 states, that
as opposed to the background check that we have now, where we have 50 different background checks in 50 different states.
I feel like it would have to be some sort of universal standard. I imagine, right? I imagine be pretty hard to enforce if every state or locality had like a disparate sort of background check associated with it. But again, if that was just one piece of evidence or one solution that I proposed, just based on, again, what the RAND Corporation was throwing out there in terms of moderate levels of research to reinforce. So if you've got like quibbles with it, or if you think that it would not be effective, I'm certainly open to the arguments to the contrary.
No, I mean, it's just doesn't really make sense because currently we have a federal form in all 50 states. You believe in like the gun show loophole?
Isn't there a gun show loophole?
No. Like gun shows are comprised of FFLs, which are federal firearm licensees. So they're backed by the federal government. They have to abide by all of federal regulations. And it's the same thing for our current background check, which is a 4473. It's just a federal background check.
Yeah.
So
just say
what is a universal background check?
It sounds like I would have to do more research on it, but it sounds like one is already imposed if based on what you're saying, and it's not efficacious. So I'll have to go back and do more research on it. I don't know enough to contradict you there.
Well, just as someone who's on your side, this is what I was kind of touching on earlier, which was that I don't think there's any statistical evidence to suggest that background checks do reduce gun violence unless they are in tandem with some other form of like licensing practices and things like that. So when someone says universal background checks, I don't think that the idea itself is the problem. I think that it's been shown to, in a vacuum by itself, not really work. It has to be done in tandem with other practices.
Just because I don't know, right?
That was my point.
Just as a question.
I agree with you. I 100%.
A clarifying question because I don't know, right? If I personally wanted to sell my gun to Pondering Politics, would I need to get him a background check before I do that? From private to private sales, does that require a background check?
It depends on your state.
It depends on the state. As far as I know, it's very nebulous. But there's lots of places where there's not a whole lot of regulation on this on private sales.
That being said, if you end up selling more than like 2 or 3 firearms, depending on your state, in that manner, you can get in like the ATF is coming for you if they find
Ranger. Would you propose?
There's some issues there.
Real quick before I head out. So Ranger, would you oppose in a situation like that a background check be mandatory from private seller to private buyer?
Me personally, background checks are an entirely different issue. Under our current framework, it would make the most sense. Like if I was on the left arguing for strengthening background checks, I would definitely go after the private sale versus going to an FFL, which is literally, a federally licensed dealer.
Oh, well, to clarify, and again, this is probably on my fault. Sir,
I want to speak to you as well, briefly.
Sure. Well, hang on, real quick. I would just say, so again, to clarify here, when I'm talking about, I guess, background checks, 2 things. I would say, number 1, I imagine that they would need to be standardized at a federal level in all 50 states, so they couldn't be disparate. Number 2, I guess in my mind, I am imagining a scenario in which legislatively they would be imposed on all legal gun transactions, which includes private seller to private buyer. And if you want to have a conversation where you could potentially educate me on the subject, if you have evidence where it would be efficacious or would not be efficacious, just DM me and you and I can set something up. Because again, what you will find is that the firmest position I have is that I think that the Second Amendment is subject to limitations and constraints. What things would be efficacious, I am open to. Again, because I also acknowledge that the research is extremely limited. So you can persuade me, if you have the data to support it, hey, actually, red flag logs would not be efficacious for this, this, and this. So why don't you and I set up a time if you're interested in having a conversation about it?
Absolutely.
Can you throw me a DM?
Yeah, of course.
Right now?
Okay. Well,
So
I'm glad I
you?
said it. I'm glad I facilitated this meeting of the minds. Excellent.
That's right. We've just made best friends right here. I thought it was just Scott and I at first, but now
beautiful.
it's Ranger and Rogue.
True.
@𝕐𝖍𝖎, can you go? Because I got to go in about 5 minutes.
I'm not your best friend, and I was calling you out consistently in chat because I believe you misquoted every point of data that you spoke about. Not that the data was necessarily wrong; it's just like the wrong data to use. These were complete red herrings. So it doesn't matter if the USA has if the USA has more gun deaths or gun murders than some country. That statistic, that comparison doesn't matter at all. Like, it's ridiculous to quote. Why? Because if there's a country called Luxembourg, which is a fraction, like a tiny fraction of the size of the United States, then clearly it doesn't matter what policies you have, you will always have more.
He was referencing per capita numbers, which adjust for population.
Yes, but every single number that you referenced includes suicides, which the United States is number 2 in the world after Greenland, meaning realistically number 1 for a country that's not Greenland, which is suicide central. So the United States, if you remove the suicides from the data, it falls within that chart because suicides account for like 75% of the deaths. And this is still including gun violence, which is very much localized to gang-controlled areas in the United States. If you reduce those, then we're one of the safest countries in the world, and none of your policies make any sense. So really, you have a gang crime problem in the United States and in other countries in the world. So, and if you look at per capita, and you said the word mass shootings at the start, and mass shootings cannot be per capita. The United States is number 11 in the world, number 11, with countries like Switzerland. I mean, people objected in chat that I quoted Norway as number 1 because it had 1 giant mass shootings. I don't know why you would exclude that. I mean, you choose years arbitrarily all the time.
Wait, is this mass shootings?
It is again, it is mass shootings controlled by using the same methodology, which is you have to make sure that mass shootings mean the same thing in different countries. So
which is a problem trying to measure mass shootings because there are like 10,000 different definitions.
But if you do name it, the best available data that we have, controlled for population, says that Norway is number 1 at 1.8 per I think million. France is, I believe, number 2 with like 0.3, and the USA is 1/3 of France at 0.08. So the United States is safer than France, even though we have overwhelmingly much more gun ownership.
You can't say that we're specifically talking about mass shootings and then also say that we're safer when we've acknowledged that mass shootings are a small component of the gun violence problem.
Yes, so I mean, I didn't introduce it into this debate early on.
You just said that just now.
It was done by Judicial and this one. So number 2, if you read the study by Rand Corporation, it is one of their studies. I don't think they're an unbiased source. They are neocons. They're known to be neocons. You would not quote them about anything else except gun control because neocons actually are pro-military, but they're not pro-individual gun ownership. They would want our society more reliant on police. They would want more police funding because they represent those interests in the United States.
Well, that's probably why we should repeal the 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙 Amendment and allow for more comprehensive gun control research in the United States, the pros and cons. And it's the right wing in this country which prevented that. Absolutely.
Perhaps, but the Rand
no, it's not perhaps. It's a matter of fact. It's simply a matter of fact.
You quoted what their study did, what their major study did, which was published by Reason TV. In the video, there's a great summary that gun control policies don't work by Reason TV. And you would look that they referenced the Rand study, and what the Rand study did is they took the 2,500 of the best studies in the United States, and they debunked 95% of them. And in the last 5%, there were some studies that had marginal benefit in terms of
I don't
policy,
think that they debunked them. I
couldn't
think they
control for.
excluded them because they weren't methodologically rigorous enough to be included in their
For the
analysis.
same reason why we discovered today, you can't really rely on just the raw numbers because you can find numbers that support both of your perspectives.
So they didn't
Right, your
debunk
side quoted
anything.
raw
They just
numbers
excluded the
here in
vast
chat.
majority of the research, which is why we need more comprehensive research.
And
So
to be fair, go ahead.
I think
well, I was just
Josiah
gonna
has
say,
to go.
so I said mass shootings initially because that is one component, but I said throughout the remainder of the
Which
conversation,
is
gun
false,
violence
right?
in
You admit
general.
it's false now. Just to be sure, you admit it's mass shootings.
I admit-
The United
I think he
States,
was
just say
fair
the
about
words.
what
United
he was
States is
fair.
not number one in mass shootings. That's it.
I admit what's false?
The United States is number 11 at mass shootings worldwide. Yes.
No,
capita.
you said that, but I don't know if that's true. You've offered no evidence of the if you want, you can send me the source.
Do you want me to stream the graph right now?
Yeah, but hold on,
So hang on, bro,
Casimir.
Casimir, we're having a conversation here. You said words offered no evidence to the contrary. I'm not saying that you're wrong, but you say, I said these things, I demand a concession. Just DM me the source and I'll take a look at it. Just chill. It's all right. It's good.
Yeah, it's crimeresearch.org. I linked it multiple times in chat.
I wasn't looking at chat. I was looking at Discord here. I didn't have his chat up. So I didn't see anything that you said, by the way.
It's
Say
the
what?
one that I linked you in Discord.
I just
The
want to go
chart
around
is the one I
and-
linked you in Discord.
This is
This
what
is
I'm
what
saying.
he's
referencing.
Wait, Casimir, I'm sorry. You cut out. The source sucks?
No.
The
It's
source
the
is
the source Scott.
Casimir,
the-
hush.
Oh, the source Scott. Oh, okay. I was like,
It's the
okay.
same one. He sent it to me, and I was like, all right, fuck it, I'll look
Perfect.
at it.
I'll check it out as soon
It's
as
in
I
Discord
can.
already.
Ranger and Rogue, let's set something up. Casimir, let's set something up. Let's talk about it. Send me a DM. I'm happy to chat with you about it. Okay?
Yeah,
Sure,
and
that's good.
one more tiny point about the years chosen.
Thank you for the $5, Josh CFC. There you go, Wick. Keep up the great content. I will. Okay, carry on, gang.
A lot of people in chat complained about my study being between the year 2009 and 2015. I want to answer those people. So let's do the last 200 years.
I'm heading
instead.
out. Hey, guys, thank you. Casimir,
Sorry.
Ranger Rover,
Have a
thanks,
great day.
everybody. Appreciate it. Talk to you
See you
later.
around, man.
I have another source which is called Necrometrics, and Necrometrics includes the stats for gun violence for the last 200 years, and it's sorted by millions. So, like, there's a page on where gun violence exceeded 5 million in a particular country, which includes the Holocaust, the Holodomor, which was executed using gun violence, which includes the terror of Mao and the terror of Stalin, which includes gun executions. So, if we want to choose years and choose the most convenient, time scale, let's include all the mass genocides by government. Why not?
You know, we're talking about
Just
right
real quick,
now.
Falsers,
We're
your
talking
mic
about.
is I don't know what it is, but we're not picking you up. It's kind of
Sounds like your noise gate's a little too strong. Yeah.
yeah
Pointing
Falsers,
to yourself.
Yeah.
Maybe reduce your noise gate a little bit.
Okay, sorry about that. Just because he's trying to say that's bad data, and I want to invite him in on the discussion, Falsers, to ask why.
You're quiet, but yes.
Okay, fair enough. I'll just have to be quiet. I don't have time to stop my audio. It's bad data. So the reason it's bad data is if we're having a conversation about relevant gun violence today in today's culture, we are not in World War II. We are not 100 years ago. We are not 200 years ago. We are in a modern
He's literally
era.
making that claim. You're agreeing with Casimir.
So that's fine.
You-
That's fine.
You're agreeing with him because people were challenging him for using a limited time frame of the data, and he's saying, well, there's another source I can use. It's 200 years, but like this is the recent data.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, that's
So
all.
I do think Casimir did misrepresent a little bit of data as well, though. So when we talk about gun violence, obviously we're not going to talk about it like holistically in terms of the raw volume, because he makes a very astute point that we have a much higher population.
Can you not just turn your mic up just a smidge?
Probably not, because I'm using earbuds. I can add
Did you
earbuds.
bump? You could bump him up, Wick.
He's at 200
Yes.
for me.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I can hear him fine at like
He sounds okay to
150.
me. Yeah.
Carry on. Sorry.
Sorry about that. So we use per capita data, right? And even in terms of per capita data, we have a much higher gun violence rate than pretty much every other country of similar economic and developmental status.
Except France.
That's not true, Scott.
Not
France is.
except
I
France
checked
is
a
about a
bunch of numbers.
third.
It's ranked significantly lower. I
Yeah,
think the
I can
number
think
you're
right
referencing
now.
is mass shootings specifically.
No,
yes, which is what we quoted initially. And
So,
what you're
to
doing
be
is you're
clear-
including suicides. Again, I
No,
debunk
no.
this point. You
No,
cannot
that's
say
wrong.
37,000 deaths. You cannot say 40,000 deaths when the actual gun deaths is only 10,000, and the
I'm happy to link you.
30,000 on
Hold
top
on.
of that
Hold on,
is
hold on.
suicides. That's ridiculous.
Let me finish. This is not
Finish.
suicides. This is homicides that we're talking about right now. It specifically excludes suicides, and it's talking about homicides, firearm violence. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about self-inflicted suicides here. And so the United States still has a rate of homicides per 100K significantly higher than France as of 2022 data. And we see this going back in the trends as well. I will send that source right now so you guys can see it.
The reason why, Scott, just to be clear, and Casimir, this is for you too. The reason why I made a point to repeatedly say that I don't need this conversation to circulate around mass shootings is because I feel like it does skew the data. If we just look at mass shootings, which are statistically a relatively small component of our gun violence problem, we start getting all these crazy numbers from different countries per capita around the world. I'm not interested in that conversation. I'm interested in the total number of deaths that are because of guns. And to me, just to be clear, the suicide data is very compelling. I don't know if it's as compelling. So it is almost as compelling for me.
But you want to include the Holocaust.
I'm curious. Hold on. No. I'm just curious, right? We've reached a point in the discussion where, like, let's set mass shootings aside. Okay? Yeah. If we set mass shootings aside, we are overwhelmingly talking about gang violence and crime issues from people that illegally purchase firearms on the streets. So if we're talking predominantly, if the gun problem is illegal purchases of firearms on the streets and gang violence, what are your solutions in terms of gun control that you believe is necessary to deal with those situations that don't infringe upon the liberties of individuals that are legally purchasing these firearms, since they're obviously in separate categories and they're not
I'm with you. I just, as I said earlier, that when we start to get into the numbers game of what percentage of these shootings are committed with legally purchased firearms, illegally, what percentage are gang related, it's a zero-sum game. I can find numbers that support either side.
We can agree that it's a majority. Correct? That it's a majority.
I don't know. No. I'm not being bad faith. Okay. I genuinely do not know.
Well, okay. So if you don't understand where any of the problem is, why in any way, shape, or form, and we're pretending that I'm supposed to take a consequentialist analysis, and you don't have any ability to define any of the things, well, then how is your system and your belief and your argument not simply subjective histrionics based off of, I don't like guns, they feel icky and bad?
No, well, have I said that one time that I didn't like guns and felt like they were icky and bad? Is that what you're taking from my stances?
When you guys
how about you just answer the question instead of attack the specific terminology? How about I'll be more specific?
Well, the terminology you're using is to say that I'm using some sort of pathos in my argument. I'm saying we can use all this verifiable data from gun control measures around the world to say you want to restrict rights. Your argument is from a consequentialist analysis, and when I grill you on the data, you basically say, "Well, we don't really know the data." So where are you getting this consequentialist analysis from, other than your fee-fees? There's specific data within the USA, which it is highly contested whether it is verifiable information or not, especially because, as Pondering said multiple times, the Dickey Act has put kind of a damper on our ability to assess these problems.
So where the fuck do you get the authority to restrict people's rights when you don't fucking understand what the consequences will be? It's a shitty consequentialist argument. If consequentialism wasn't already fucking trash, you goddamn monster.
Can I ask a question? Can I interject and ask a quick question? So, by the way, is my mic okay now?
It sounds great.
Yeah, you sound great.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. I appreciate you.
Yeah, you sound good. Smooth as a motherfucker, too.
Thank you. So, Fabian, when you say right, and I'm sorry if you guys have already covered this, I apologize. Again, I don't have the context. I came in very late. When you say right, what is a right to you, like intrinsically? Where's the line for that right?
I would say that private property is a right derived from bodily autonomy and freedom from aggression. So negative rights from people infringing upon your bodily autonomy. And because of the historical link associated with property, this includes your property.
Sorry, let me clarify my question. I'm not necessarily asking
Mhm.
where the right is coming from. I'm asking you where the line for a right is. So is it something that everyone gets by default, or do we draw boundaries? And if those boundaries exist, where are they?
So I would say that human beings as a species have the right of personhood, regardless of their ability to, I mean, I don't want to get into like into the axioms here too deeply. I'll just simply say that human beings have a right of personhood, and this means the negative right from aggression. And stealing or restricting people's persons or property, such as taking away guns or stopping them from being able to engage in the market freely with voluntary transactions, is an infringement upon their rights.
Great. So it sounds like in there that you did have some qualifiers for those rights, though. So can we agree that there are boundaries for these rights? They're not just simply to everyone. I see Casimir shaking his head, and I want to ask Casimir a question then too here. So we restrict felons from owning firearms in this nation in many cases. Is that infringing upon the right of felons, or is that simply enforcing our law as we know it?
It depends on the felony, but the felon has a the person has the same fundamental right to not be aggressed against until they become an aggressor, and by doing so, until they complete restitution and the retribution from the victim, they have a limitation on what they can claim. So they've lost that through doing these actions that are
they're stopped from arguing for those rights.
So that sounds a bit like an opinion, and I think it's your prerogative to hold it, and that's well and good. But that's not something which you just expressed.
It's an objective fact of logic.
But it may be, but it's not in our Constitution. And it sounds like you guys are deriving a lot of these rights from the legality of the Constitution. And again, if we are going to acknowledge...
No. If you were here earlier, I've specifically throughout the entire debate said that the Founding Fathers did not go far enough, that they were using utilitarianism and convergence theory to attempt through the scientific method to discover what our natural rights were, and were in the Enlightenment philosophy doing so, and they established liberal democracy. And it's not their fault that things such as the non-aggression principle and argumentation ethics and estoppel as applied to law were not discovered as of yet.
So we have a natural right to firearms. We have a natural right to firearms.
Person and property includes firearms.
Okay, I'm going to skip to the end because my point's running a little long to the tooth.
One moment. When he says, I want to translate for you the word natural as it's used historically. So there's the normal definition of it is that philosophically something that natural means that it comes from something in reality that gives you that. It's a realist claim. So for example, if you can derive something from logic, you would consider it natural potentially. And throughout the history of the use of that term, the Founding Fathers considered it. Their explanation was that there's a God, and God gives everybody equality from being under God. And from that Christian perspective, they derived the equality.
Casimir, you're derailing me a little bit. It's running a little long because that's not my bigger point. The natural, it doesn't really matter for me here. By the way, side note here, I think the whole argument of like having a natural right to firearms in some way is patently absurd. That aside, so my question is, with firearms specifically, is there a point in which you would say that enough harm is coming from them where you would want to restrict them more in a major way? Does that line exist for you?
So absolutely. I am all for restrictions and regulations. Voluntary ones.
Where is that line?
The line is as much as the individual wants it to be and whom they choose to voluntarily associate want it to be. So, for example, we could look
as a country, not as an individual. As a country.
No.
So there's not a place where you would restrict them at all.
I didn't sign any goddamn contract with you for you to restrict upon my rights. However, if I was, I don't know, let's say Amish or a Mennonite or some other form of religious community that was a pacifist, I absolutely could create a covenant community where everyone in our community voluntarily associates and says, we don't like firearms. We don't want firearms here. Now, granted, they might be overrun because it's kind of a dumb idea. And they might need to figure out some way of protection. But nevertheless, you can voluntarily restrict them as much as you want. What's different is when you tell me that you have a right because of a ballot box to tell me what I can and can't do with my fucking property, despite the fact that I've harmed no one.
So let me Ben Shapiro you a little bit here. So hypothetically, if we were in a situation where you woke up tomorrow and 500 school shootings happened, right? And in each of those school shootings, 100 children died, and all of them were caused by firearms. You're still not on board as a nation with us saying, let's take a look at our access to firearms.
Can I jump in here because this kind of touches like what 𝕾𝖎𝖎 was saying earlier.
No, wait. No, don't derail this. This was horrible.
I'm not going to derail this.
I just want to understand where the line is.
Is this your last question? Hold on. Is this your last question? And so that other people can speak, I'll answer this last question.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we can
it's really simple. It's really simple. No, absolutely not. There's no fucking line. And here's the thing. The absurdity with the example that you gave. Imagine.
Well, it's meant to be absurd.
No,
it's meant to be.
No. Don't interrupt me. Imagine for a moment, right, that actually happened and the government decided to do nothing. Every mom and parent in America would immediately pull their children out of schools and begin forming homeschooling co-op initiatives and would just break away from the system because of the presumed failure of the state to protect their children. And while those deaths would be a horrible fucking tragedy, I don't know how the fuck they happened. Maybe it was because you instituted too many gun laws and only criminals were able to get into the schools and the children weren't properly protected. But maybe that's why so many gun deaths happen. But regardless, is the idea that people individually, that parents would not form ways to protect their children is insane. It's this knee-jerk reaction for the state to do things that we as individuals. What do you mean they're not now?
We're absolutely not now as a country. So like the fact that you guys try to take this moral high ground on this issue. Hold on. So you're trying to take a moral high ground here. We do have a gun violence in this country. And people are trying to skew the data and misrepresent it. But the reality is there are clear correlations in the data across states that have higher gun regulation laws and higher quality of gun regulation and lower rates of firearm violence and homicide.
Absolutely not true.
It's absolutely true. I will send you the source right now.
I can give you the numbers because I know it's not true.
For you to try to sit here and moral grandstand.
Hey, we got it. Hey, all of you, stop. We can't hear you when you talk over each other. Finish quickly, concisely, and then what's your name, sir? The Sovereign can respond.
Yep.
Finish.
Yep.
The Sovereign. That's where we go. Go.
Yep. So the end point of morality is human life. When people start dying, nothing really gets too much worse than that at a mass scale. We are having people die. Your rights, as you're calling them, are not worth more than the lives of our children and the incredibly high gun rates.
No. I got this real quick. So no, hold on.
Well, I gave Sovereign the chance here. I gave Sovereign the chance, so let's start Sovereign.
I'm going to link my source now. It's directed and attacking me. I'll be very quick because it's directed and attacking me. So the end point is human life. You will justify any violation of people's rights because human life is more important than their suffering or their rights being denied. So I have this very simple question to you. When a criminal holds you hostage and is using weapons and force and killing other people, right? And they say to you, I'll stop so long as you rape this 4-year-old boy. How long are you going to rape this 4-year-old boy to stop the violence? Because the end point is the human life. So you have to, by your logic, accept that you're going to rape the 4-year-old boy over and over and over again, so long as the criminal that is holding you hostage is killing people. How long are you going to do it before you decide to off yourself and become just one more point in the data statistics that gets skewed towards guns being suicides and not actual murders?
Yeah, so the answer is you can try to philosophy brain it all you want to the furthest possible absurdity. But hold on. You gotta let me answer. So the reality is when I say a human life, that's not simply just dead or alive, right? There's more that goes into it than that. There absolutely is. But when you die, that is a finality, right? Like that's just it. That's an endpoint. And so we are having children die. This is hold on. We are not faced with a choice. We are not faced with a choice of having to like sexually assault children or have children die from gun violence. That's not the choice here. So for you to try to inflate it as that, it doesn't apply. I don't have to philosophy brain it to the most.
I just turn your bullshit logic off.
He was grandstanding, right? And as soon as this grandstanding with using this value of life above everything else was turned against him,
Obviously, no, Casimir.
No,
Obviously,
you
there's
took
a
what he
context.
said too literally.
There's a
becomes
context.
Now it becomes nuanced. However, your nuance means excluding all the major.
Casimir, the nuance is
all the
implied in that
major
we're talking about gun
genocides,
violence right now.
the gun
Okay,
violence by
we're not talking
government
about whether or
side.
not to sexually
The
assault
reason
children.
why
It's silly.
you should calm
Nuance,
down,
bro.
relax. and
I'm
you
so
should
much
open
better than
your
you, but now
ears.
nuance.
No one's worked up.
You should open your ears and listen. There is currently a genocide in Sudan that was stopped because people received weapons and those people opposed. There were two ethnic groups fighting each other.
We're not in
One of
Sudan.
them was getting murdered by the government. That was one genocide. There was also a genocide in Rwanda. So I'm, my people have a saying. It's called.
We got to go around. We got to get to.
We do.
Sovereign,
We got to get to Anja, and then Isaac, and then Sovereign.
I got Sovereign first. Sovereign's the first one that goes because I already said he can go, but Fabian took his spot, right?
yeah, give
He
Sovereign
aggressed
first.
upon you and took your spot.
All right.
Okay,
At
so
one point, I'll prove that this guy is doing Holocaust denial right now on stream
Hold
with
on.
his cherry picking of data.
Sovereign, go on. We all got things we got to say on this.
All right, Sovereign. I
Yeah,
assume you're here for me. What's up, man?
Sovereign.
No,
go
I'm,
ahead.
I'm not actually. I'm here for falsers.
Great.
Whatever issue I have with you, I'll take it with you in chat later. So, falsers, you're patently wrong about the correlation that you're trying to make between gun access, gun ownership rates, and gun laws, and correlation to gun homicide rates. It's not consistent across states at all. If you look at states like New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, all of those have incredibly lax gun laws, and they're always at the bottom of gun homicides every fucking year. And then you look at states like
FSP,
Maryland or
baby.
Illinois. Delaware, California, states like that, they all have significantly higher gun homicides per capita. It has nothing to do with access, ownership, or laws. It's socioeconomic. It's always been socioeconomic. That's why states like Louisiana that technically have stricter laws than places like New Hampshire and Vermont and Maine, Massachusetts, all of them always have much higher gun homicide rates. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Great. Well, I'm glad you say that because the CDC disagrees with you. I'm looking at it as we speak. And there is a geographical correlation where gun violence and gun rates per capita are much higher in the Southeast right now, where gun regulation is much weaker. You claim California. You claim California is amongst the top. Let's look at where it is.
What you're talking about again. So it let me again interrupt you to correct you on not knowing what the fuck you're talking about.
Go ahead.
So the CDC data that you're citing, we don't even need to use it because we can look at gun homicides per state. We can look at states. The reason you're saying the Southeast and trying to say the Southeast has like less strict gun laws or whatever. South Carolina has stricter gun laws than fucking Vermont. South Carolina has stricter gun laws than New Hampshire. You don't know what you're talking about. This is something that gets repeated by a lot of gun control people because they don't understand how like socioeconomically correlated it is. And throughout this entire conversation, for some reason, the gun control people have been conflating method with causality the entire time. I do statistics for a living. The entire time, even in the hypothetical that you gave, you said, "Oh, if 500 schools were shot up and the cause was guns, the cause wouldn't be guns. That's the method." You don't understand the difference.
Sav, are you saying
that's a hypothetical?
Wait, Sav, I just want to make sure. Okay,
go ahead.
so most of the information that I come across does indicate that states who have more lax gun laws tend to have higher rates of gun deaths. Are you saying that that's tautological? Is that your point?
What I'm saying is that gun homicides do not correlate in the same way and not proportionally in any way.
If
And
you
there's
segregate
states
the
with-
suicides.
Yeah, I
That's
don't
what you're
care.
saying.
So yeah,
No, I'm asking. That's what I'm asking you.
No, we're specifically talking about gun homicides.
Okay.
Because you don't regulate somebody's ability to own something based on what somebody else wants to do to themselves, except for drugs and guns.
I mean,
for some
we
reason.
do.
I'm talking about
stop.
firearm deaths,
We
to be clear.
absolutely do. So I don't understand why we can
Totally.
segregate suicides from this, right? If
We
suicide
segregate
deaths
them
when it comes
because-
to guns absolutely count. Why do they not?
Can I jump in there on that? If we're going to include
Gibbs, go
suicide,
ahead.
we have to include like mass genocides as well, because we keep talking about countries with some of these strictest gun laws.
Sure, let's segregate in the last 20 years.
I mean,
I'm fine
China's
with that.
killed millions. I mean, yeah, and I really, we can really
That's
talk
okay.
about whatever metric.
Even
whatever
if we
metric
like
want.
Gibbs, even if we say that other countries are worse, we still have a problem, don't we?
I mean, I'm not arguing there's not a problem, but this kind of comes back to why I'm saying that is the issue with the guns fundamentally is that
You
it's
said
price
there
we in
wasn't a
businesses.
problem.
I mean, I don't think there is a problem personally, but I'm saying hypothetically, if we're going to admit there's a problem.
So you don't think there's a problem? Okay. Okay.
The point that I'm making is that it doesn't matter if there's a problem or not. The problem is if they come and take the guns, because the guns are designed for the people to defend themselves against the government and to defend themselves in general. That's what the guns are for. These things all suck that y'all are talking about. But the minute we start taking them away, it's been proven time and time again, mass genocide occurs. And for y'all to sit here and try to dismiss that is outrageous and just not based in history.
And you can look at this. You can look at the example of this right now. Everybody who's in chat, who's observing this debate, I can't link it here, and nobody that's streaming can show you this because it is, not safe for work, most likely not safe for Twitch. But you should type something like Belarus protests and then beatings. And you will see that there is video after video showing brutal suppression of protesters by a regime that manipulated, did something to their voting system that elected a dictator, basically the last dictator in Europe. And people spent 6 months protesting.
Are you saying there's been a genocide in Britain since they've brought their gun laws down? Has there been a genocide or a Holocaust in Britain since they brought their gun laws down?
I'm saying that you
to Gibbs, because Gibbs said that in every country, Great Britain, you are saying there's a genocide in Great Britain taking place. Right?
Britain's policy allowed the Holocaust.
I'm talking the last 20 years.
The Holocaust, when it was bombing Germany and the bombers were flying.
I'm talking 20 years. Last 20 years. Keep it to my lifetime, buddy. Keep it to 50 years. Let's keep it to the last 50 years.
China.
Keep it to anything.
I'm talking Britain specifically because you said every country.
The current genocide in Sudan stopped by private ownership of guns by militias. I mentioned Rwanda, which could have been stopped by private ownership of guns.
Let's talk about
genocide there. I could mention the genocide in Lebanon, where the Christians were genocided, were massacred, and could only defend themselves because they had some guns. In every country
these
where you have
scenarios in
people that
America.
are disarmed and there's any type of ethnic or cultural.
So, Casimir, are you saying right now, stop, Casimir, I'm going to challenge you directly this right now, then I want other people to get in here, but I want you to answer this question. If we got rid of guns or restricted guns in America, right? If we change the Second Amendment so that there were tighter restrictions on gun laws, are you saying that there would be a genocide in America?
I am saying that
yes or no?
Yes, we would be on the path.
Yes, we would be genocide. Okay, I just want to get that on record. That's your claim. That if we restrict gun laws, genocide. Got it.
Wick, when did you stop beating your wife, Wick?
Please.
Wick, when did you stop beating your wife?
When I get more subs in chat.
Give me the date.
I have evidence. When
did you stop beating your wife?
Stop. I have evidence.
No, your
I have evidence.
Hey, Wick.
That have totally different socio-political scenarios
Wick.
than we have in America.
I haven't seen you in like a long time, bro.
We had scenarios.
Yeah. So like, whenever you get a minute,
were attacked by
to
the
interrupt
US
this,
government.
just let me know.
We had scenarios, including right now. Now you don't believe because he made it look like my point is preposterous, and then multiple people silenced me. So let's look at the evidence.
Multiple people silenced you.
Casimir, you've been
you've been talking like
in 2020. In 2020, during the lockdowns, people with guns marched into a government building and prevented harsher lockdowns from occurring. So it already indicates to you that the government was willing to deprive people of one fundamental right that they have, which is the right to provide for their family, and people decided that they are not going to have it, even though they were a local minority. That's
silly.
Whereas people who are unarmed, like certain Black Lives Matter protesters, are beaten by police systematically. Like Occupy Wall Street was beaten by police systematically. Everybody saw the police officer come in front of a row of people and spray them in the eyes with a gas.
Can we take a break from the Casimir show for like 5 minutes?
I want to get other people in here. I want to get other people in here. Casimir, I'm sure you will get a chance later to speak more. I promise you will get a chance later to speak more. But I promise you, if I wanted to silence you, I'd just do this, buddy. If I wanted to silence you, I'd just do that. That's what I would do. Okay, I would mute you, right? And that's what I would do. I'm not trying to silence you. I'm just saying that there's 12 people on this. Well, no, sorry, math. 10 people on this panel that need to talk. I think your point's a little preposterous. I think that like equating getting sprayed and pepper sprayed in the eyes, well, that's probably not a good idea. And lockdowns also not I wasn't a big fan of all of the lockdowns, right? That's not genocide. Let's stop conflating. Critical thinking. It's been a while. I want to give you a chance. You haven't had a chance to speak yet. I understand everyone was. I see you too, Isaac. I see you too.
Gibbs and I both raised our hands before he was even in here.
No, it's fine. I've talked a lot.
Wick, that was.
I can wait.
That was such a great adult way to say what I'm about to say for the learning impaired out there, right? Because I'm gonna just let everybody know, right? Wick was saying, "Shut the fuck up." Okay, just so we're clear. Okay. Anyway, that said, Wick, I haven't seen you in a long time, man. Last time I seen you, you were just kind of getting started out. I see now you kind of making a name for yourself. I see you out here putting on a show, pretty regular. See you got a pretty good sized audience. So, I can see the work that you've been putting in, and I recognize that. So,
appreciate that.
just let you know, I see you, bro. You know what I mean?
You got any thoughts on the topic at hand so we can engage with it?
Well, let's see. What's his name? Falsers. Like I kind of memed in a joke. His logic would fall apart with the argument of abortion, right? He wouldn't have the same consideration, even though it would be along the exact same lines. But as far as gun control is concerned, the only people that ever advocate for gun control are dictators. Somebody that wants to control someone else. That's true in government. That's true in relationships. If you have a partner and they have, said, "Oh, I'm taking your gun away from you," that's a big fucking red flag. You better keep a hold of your gun. I don't give a fuck who it is, right? Because at the end of the day, God said that everybody understands it to be the meek shall inherit the earth, and that meek is supposed to be somehow weak. Now, anybody else has heard Jordan Peter's explanation of meek and how it's differently seen as those that have their swords sheathed but are ready to use them, right? Which I would say is much more accurate to the way that God would have his people be ready. Self-defense is a part of that. He didn't say, "Hey, just lay over and take it from everybody," but he didn't say,
"You guys
go pick the fight." So, in this instance, your legislation at the federal level, I will always put down. Doesn't matter.
You're also putting words in Falser's mouth, by the way.
Where it's like, why are we having gun violence? And it's because young men aren't cleaning their room. And that's something to think about. Because if you clean your room and you get rid of the chaos, you get rid of the guns.
That's right. So remember.
Very good.
Remember, okay,
Sorry.
that it doesn't matter how many laws you put on the books. Criminals are going to have their guns. And if you want to have a meaningful conversation about reducing gun violence, then you need to have a meaningful conversation about increasing gun education. And until you're ready to have that one, we're going to continue to have dumbass politicians try to tell everybody that an AR-15 is an assault rifle, right? When all it is a semi-automatic rifle. Period. And that's how
No one said anything close to that on this entire panel.
Just to be,
I don't give a fuck if anybody said it. Just introducing new shit.
You're combating ideas that have not been presented here today.
So people have been trying to pay me money. People are trying to pay me money. People are trying to pay me money, right? And gang, this is an open panel, so if you want to pay me money, I will mute a motherfucker. I will kick them off, but you got to pay me more than you just did. So 500 more bits to mute someone for, let's say 5 minutes. And if you give me 5,000 bits, I'll kick them off. Cool. Let's do this. Okay. I want to respond to that point, gang. I want more people in. I want to give Isaac a chance here. Isaac hasn't had a chance. He's had his hand up. He's been ready to talk. He hasn't got a chance to talk. Now's your time to shine, buddy. Impress us.
I want to say Gibbs had his hand up at the same time.
I don't care. Go ahead. I'm giving it to you.
I have some statistics that I found. So about 45 minutes ago, somebody, I believe it was Scott, actually brought up stolen firearms being used primarily in committing murders, basically. So let's see. In 2019, there was 10,258 firearm murders, not including
And they have paid me
suicides.
to mute you for 5 minutes, CTV. Sorry, buddy. I love you, but I love money more. So
Rest in peace. And then the number of recovered firearms that were either stolen or missing in 2019 was 2,273. So that's still roughly 75% of firearm murders that were committed by firearms that had a rightful owner. Or, well, no, that's not exactly true. They could have just been unaccounted for. So,
What's your point?
that you were wrong.
He's refuting this.
You haven't refuted anything other. The only thing you've said is data on how many guns were found that were illegal
Can I make a comment on the data
in the
very
commission
quickly?
of these crimes.
So you're
I'll be
positing that
concise here, too.
7,500 guns just haven't been found yet.
Okay. Let me see your data. Your data is based off of. So the argument that you're making is that the studies that state that the majority of gang violence and crimes are committed by illegal firearms is untrue because of the amount of cases in which the police have investigated and discovered the firearm in question. And so you're saying any other death must automatically fall into the category of legally obtained firearm, regardless of whether or not the police solved the murder.
But if they haven't found the firearm, then how can we say that the study that was determining that the firearm was illegal, how can we give credence to that one?
Right. Well, I mean, the same way that polling data works, right? Like when you do a poll, you don't ask every American, and let's say if you're going to do a poll on like Virginia, right? And like whose Virginia citizens are going to vote for. You don't ask every single solitary citizen in the state of Virginia.
Yeah, we're
what you do
extrapolating.
is you're extrapolating. Right? A lot of crimes go unsolved. Right? I don't know if you've ever watched the first 48. Right? But like Tom Segura has a nice bit about it where it's Wednesday and they go, "What about that? What are we doing today?" "Oh, nothing." And he goes, "What about that murder on Monday?" It's like, "Oh, it's Wednesday. We're not going to solve that shit." Like there's a lot of unsolved murders and cases and a lot of unrecovered firearms. The data is not looking at every firearm and then assuming every other murder must fall into the category of legal firearm. They're looking at, of the murders that we solve, what are the percentages that are done with legally owned firearms? What are the percentages that are done with illegal firearms?
Yes. It just sounds like this is inconclusive, which is what I was talking about earlier. It's why I kind of struggle to go down this avenue of conversation. So like Isaac, even though that totally supports my perspective on it, it's really hard to have this conversation when we kind of don't really know either way.
Yeah,
but your perspective is that your perspective is that you know enough to be able to make a consequential analysis to say that the moral good is to restrict people's rights in order to have a more positive outcome. And every time we bring up statistics, there's counter statistics and there's different arguments from different sides. And you eventually
there's really not. There's really not. You guys are playing mental gymnastics with the data. There's so much mental gymnastics with the data here. There's clear data from the CDC. There's like health data. There's
Please bring up the CDC data. Please bring. I know the CDC data you're talking about, and I want you to bring it up.
Let me finish my point. You guys aren't psychic. You're not psychic.
CDC data behind you.
It wasn't accidental. I did it on purpose. It was a background.
It showed South Carolina, which has very strict gun control laws, as the reddest motherfucker in the whole area.
Not only that,
debunked your own point accidentally.
It is not the strictest gun control laws. God, can I finish a fucking point before you guys dogpile?
You've been talking more than I have, so I'm going to
let me just finish my point, and then you can respond. Jesus Christ!
If you look at that same chart,
the CDC does disagree with you about the quality of the South Carolina laws.
That's what I'm telling you. So if you look at the chart,
Isaac, thank you for the sub. You're going to need a little more than that to kick Gibbs off, though. So
no. I want to let him talk.
Hey, Wick.
Wick,
I gotta call my dad. I've been here a long time. I appreciate it. Thank everybody for the time. Look, I get it. The statistics, one way or the other. He says I'm doing mental gymnastics. I understand. He has data that he believes, totally
You don't.
supports his
You would if you let
conclusion.
me explain
I
it
get
for more
that.
than 10 seconds.
And I understand, no, I get it. Well, I'll just leave with this little bit. If anybody here is retarded enough to still believe the CDC after what they've been saying and are currently saying and lying on Congress, after doctors that have been silenced over and over again have been proving the bullshit narratives that they put out wrong over and over and over again, but now you want to believe them on gun control, even though your own data is debunking you in your imagery, I don't know what to tell you. You're a lost cause, or maybe you're just doing mental gymnastics. Have a great evening, guys.
Fabian, real quick.
Wick, give me 30
Wick,
seconds here, for the love of God.
Hey,
Just 30 seconds to get my fucking point out.
It's good to see you, bro.
Okay, cool.
It's good to see you too.
Fabian,
All right,
thank
I
you
gotta
for
go call
being
my
here.
dad.
I'll see you later.
See you, Fabian.
We will get to you, Scott. I'm sorry, Falsers. Scott was just talking, and Falsers. I will give you the third. I will give you a minute of time, but first we got some other people that's been wanting to get in, so we gotta
No
let
worries,
them in.
no
We gotta
worries.
let
I'll
them in. I'm trying to get to more people here. We got Anja there wants to go. Gibbs wants to go. So that's the order we're gonna go in. Anja, then Gibbs. Anja, let's hear you, and then we'll have Gibbs go out. Go ahead.
This entire conversation has been incredibly complicated for me because I feel like I find myself not necessarily in between, but sort of in a way, not like politically, but in the way that I view the world. We're arguing in two completely different realities here from both ends of the spectrum, right? So for somebody like Fabian, they'll bring up something like natural rights. I believe similarly, 𝕍𝖎 thinks something very similar. Personally speaking, I feel that rights are a concept that we created, and they're important. They're very important, but it's a concept, much like everything else. Most things are socially constructed, but they're still important. We give them meaning by us existing. But I feel like one of the biggest disconnects here is that, right? It's very difficult to have conversations like this when on the meta level, we're not even really having the same exact, like anywhere near the same conversation. It's just going to inevitably end up butting heads for forever, essentially.
Well, there is a problem is that if you asked somebody who lived in Europe at the turn of the last century, like 1900s, and you ask them whether the things that are going to happen in Europe are going to happen, he would have the same reaction to Wick when he asked me that, gotcha question. The person in Europe would say, preposterous. A Jewish person in Europe who serves in the German military in World War I would find it preposterous that Germans would attack Jews, even though if that German was smart and he looked at all the racist bigotry that was spread about the Jews in various printing presses and various minority political parties in Germany at the time, he could have seen an escalation towards violence. And so and that person would have been right. It would have been like, it's preposterous. I'm a member of this society. Nobody would ever single me out for my innate characteristic, for my religion. Because listen, I'm secular. I'm part of this community. I shouldn't be targeted. And this is why this is such a dangerous argument. When there's no analogy, you don't get a warning. So the whole concept of never again is to look for warning signs and understand principles. The principle in the US Constitution, and that kept this country safe despite great ethnic upheavals potentially, is that the government doesn't have a responsibility for anyone's security. It's not in the Constitution. There's no duty to protect anyone.
Yes, it
or
is.
anything.
Yes, it is.
It's
in the
only
preamble
a
of the Constitution. You're wrong.
For the government itself, but not individual citizens unless they're arrested. And this is
We're talking about the government.
You're supposed to be defending the government and defending the people. It's quite a different thing. And this is the responsibility of the people throughout history.
Yeah, yes.
And the reason why I mentioned Belarus is because those people want to defend themselves against their government, but they've been disarmed. And so now Belarus is mounting nuclear weapons from Russia. That's the cost of your policy.
Yeah. But do you see this right here? Do you see what I'm doing right here? Do you know what that is?
Fingering your butthole.
That's clicking the like and subscribe button on my YouTube channel. Absolutely.
Well played,
right?
Wick.
There you go. I like that. I like the play. I like the play.
I feel like the people who say that they love America the most are the ones who have the least faith in it.
It's all the control you will need. It's called finger control for the trigger, right? Because people kill people, not guns.
Gibbs, go ahead.
Okay. So I just want to offer a point of clarification because we kind of brought this up and brought up the UK. If I said every country that had left leaning like super extreme gun control, then obviously not every country that thinks 100% accurate. And I'll make the argument that the reason there's no genocide yet in the UK, it's an outlier incident. That would be kind of my argument there. But moving forward to kind of like, there's been a lot of things that have kind of been going on here, and I just. Here's the real problem I have is that we're sitting here and we're looking at it at the micro level. We're looking at these individual incidences, the mass shootings, the crime rate, when really, in reality, in my mind, none of that actually matters, because the problem that we're having is from the influence of tyrannical governments on the inside taking over and from outside whenever you have these like invasions. And people could say modern invasions don't happen in this era, but then now the Russia invaded the Ukraine, and that you see these things all the time. Clearly the world system is not up to snuff. There was a reason, and there's a famous admiral, whenever Japan was debating invading America, he said, behind every blade of grass is a gun. So there is a legitimate fear that other countries have of invading an armed populace. And that is something that people need to take into account.
It feels like people who are pro-2A repeatedly make the assertion that America is fundamentally and culturally different than these other countries that we compare our gun violence rates to, but then simultaneously say that, well, look at these other countries where tyranny has run rampant. Which one is it?
Do you trust the government? Like, if you
do you love America?
I mean,
I
mean, America.
Why can't it be both?
Go Black
some
Fox.
ways and
Black
the
Fox
same
been
in
trying to
other
get
ways.
Well,
I mean, okay, so I want to
We're
really
also importing a lot of people,
enter this into the
right?
debate.
Have different
Because I feel like we're missing a very big part of this. So when we compare ourselves to other countries, our biggest thing is like, well, you have to really assess the culture. Every other culture kind of has like a monolithic culture. They can all assume themselves as one. And as America, we pride ourselves on that you can be anyone at any time in any space, and you can make your own breeding ground. So it's kind of like, and we don't have a gun culture that accepted in the
That's not what we
society.
pride ourselves on.
We love mixing how our ethnicities and our cultures are all American things.
What we pride ourselves on is that there is no other place in the world that you can go to and become that place. You can't go to France and become French, right? You can't go to China and become Chinese, but you can come to America and become American. That's what we pride ourselves on, is that our diversity of people and the diversity of ideas is celebrated.
And that's exactly what I'm getting at. So we're so diverse in our aspects to the point where, like, we were saying, like, we have people asking for our anti-2A people who are here currently. I would like to ask you, without guns here, what is actually being established? Like, without guns, you're saying that, like, there's going to be a removal of a large swath of violence. But that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems that no matter where America has ever been in history, there's always some grand violence that just kind of sweeps through in and out. The Wild West, the Civil Rights Movement, all these things. There's swaths of violence that happen, and something comes back to fight it back. So, but it doesn't seem like guns are like connected to that in any fashion. Go ahead.
Guns are the way people commit murder the most in America.
You're saying efficiency-wise. A gun is the most efficient way to kill, is all I'm hearing.
No, that's the way
if
they
I
do
get
it
rid of
today.
guns,
How do you know they're just the same amount of people going to get stabbed?
that's what I'm saying. I'm asking.
I don't
What
think so.
happens
The
if I
answer
remove
is no.
guns?
Yeah.
The answer is no. The same number of
Nobody's-
people would not die.
Nobody's brought up Australia yet.
Let me
and
ask
I don't know
is that
why.
actually true? Like, are knife wounds not worse than gun wounds? Because I feel like gun wounds are treatable.
We're talking about
I'm just asking,
capability
I'm
of.
curious,
Okay.
Matt. I mean, because like if you hit someone with a serrated blade,
I think that's missing the point.
So, wait,
Stop.
wait, wait.
That's
Would
missing
you
the
rather
point. The
fight a
point
bear or a
is,
tiger?
if you have a gun, you can kill more people faster, more efficiently than if you have a knife in almost every case.
There is a reason. So between
Wait,
2015 2019,
any gun.
it doesn't matter. Yes.
It doesn't matter.
Yes.
You're a fucking liar.
Have you ever shot a
What
gun
am I
before?
lying about?
If you got some old flintlock single shot fucking
Oh my god.
Yes, because we have this rampant flintlock murder problem. What the fuck are you talking about?
That's why I asked any gun, and you said yes.
Well, if
Any
I use a standard honey rifle, like there's
so
a
they
million of
give
them.
you a scenario, and then all of a sudden you're backpedaling faster than a fucking.
I'm not backpedaling anything.
Oh,
when
you're-
I'm talking about the gun problem that we have in America, I am referencing the 91% of firearm homicides that are from handguns. That's what I'm referencing.
Handguns, like this one right here.
Yes, correct.
So this right here, this is the enemy.
Compared to a knife, it absolutely is. Yes.
Really?
It seems like you don't understand what I'm saying, so
Well,
I'll just
hold
move
on,
on to
hold
Gibbs.
Okay, I wanna get some more people in here that haven't had a chance yet. And I know
this kind of knife. I mean, I just want to make sure. I want to make sure we understand what we're talking about here. This kind of knife.
I don't think you're capable of understanding what we're talking about.
So
What kind of
Falsers,
knife are we talking
Falsers has
about?
paid me money to go next, so I'm going to give it to him because I'm a capitalist. $5. Give me my 5 minute and add 5 seconds. You have a minute and 5 seconds, sir. Go ahead.
You're goddamn right. The unfortunate thing about the short-term form of panels like this, because everybody wants their time, is that you can't really fact-check people. And
That's
you guys heard
annoying.
Fabian say up and down that South Carolina had really strict gun laws. And for those of you who have been paying attention to my mini slideshow in the background, you will see that that's just empirically not true. You can Google it, and you can find multiple.
You can
legal
Google it, and what
analysis
you'll
of
find
face
is that they
value.
No, he paid me money. And,
You
can
absolute
respond
troglodyte.
after.
Let me finish. Give me my
Yeah,
minute.
you don't know what the
Shit.
fuck you're talking about.
Give me my minute. So you can find a wealth of information on this where legal analysts will show that South Carolina is missing many key laws that other states have. And then the data I showed before was the firearm mortality rate. You can do this both by homicide and suicide and find these correlations. People are quick to use the line correlation is not causation. It's not meant to be. But the utility of a correlation in data is if you have 8 metrics all showing similar correlations towards a central narrative point, you can start to find some diagnosis for a problem and then find solutions for it through the data as well. And there is an overwhelming amount of data that suggests the gun violence problems that we've been talking about here. And it is not sufficient for someone like Sovereign to simply interrupt every time someone wants to bring up that data and say, hey, you're wrong, you don't know what you're talking about. You need to provide information, contextualize it, and paint the picture. That is what you have to do. If someone is bringing that data to the table and doing those
He's got like 20 seconds
and
left.
doing
Go ahead.
those things,
Point of privilege.
then you don't just get to wave your hand and dismiss it. That's simply not how it works.
I can do this
Okay,
by
you can
pointing at
go
the
now.
sub-headline underneath the headline behind your fucking head. Gun laws in South Carolina, number 28 in the country for gun violence rate. That means that there's 22 other states that have less strict laws. 3 of those states I can name off the top of my head every time. New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont. Do you want to know which of those states has lower gun homicide rates than South Carolina? Yeah, go ahead and pull it up. I see your fucking screen lighting up because you didn't have this up. So do you want to know which of those states has lower gun homicide? Do you want to know which?
Show you.
Great. Then which of those states has lower gun homicide rates than South Carolina? Which one? All 3 of them.
Okay, so look,
So-
while we
so
got a
understand-
short break. I want to give you time to look that up, right?
Go ahead,
So
man.
short break. As the only gun on the panel, I want to make sure we get this guy's opinion on this topic, right? So what do you think about this?
Looks like some fudge shit.
Did everybody hear that? Hold on,
Who are
one
you
more
asking?
time. One more time. We're getting the
He's
guns
he's having the gun talk.
opinion. Yeah, the guns opinion on this. Okay, so
Okay.
this is the guns opinion. Here
So-
we go. One more time.
The thing about the data
One more time.
is
One more time. Hold
again,
on. One more time. 5 seconds.
we got it. We need to
Wait,
we
it's
need
an
to
inanimate
understand the
object.
context of the information. So for you to say South Carolina is in the bottom half of the strength of gun laws in our nation, that is in line with the fact that there is a correlation to higher deaths in South
The
Carolina.
problem is that you have to
hold on. You
to it.
finding
We have multiple
outliers.
examples.
You finding a couple of outliers do not change
Yeah.
the trend in the data.
So, Sav,
we look
Sav,
at
can
things
I-
like trend lines.
can
And
I-
Gibbs
Sav.
pointed out a very great point that we should look at the macro on these things.
Sav.
And he's exactly right. You have to look
So,
at the trend lines.
I've looked at this extensively, Sav, and I don't feel confident enough in it to use it as an argument. But what Fulser is saying is that there are anomalies, but there is a general correlation, which I think is objectively true.
I
Okay.
understand what
Okay.
he's saying,
Sovereign?
but the problem is
Sovereign
that if you
respond,
have-
but after Sovereign, I'll let you respond. You get to respond to that, Sovereign, but I want to get Brat in here. A Pratt Brat. I want to give her chance to speak next. So respond, and then we're gonna get her time. Go ahead.
Sure. The problem is that you can say, oh, well, you can find these outliers, but the problem is if you're trying to make a causal case, when you have multiple examples that directly contradict your causal case, you can't point to them as a causal factor. You can point to them as a method, but you can't point to them as a causal factor. And this isn't just like South Carolina and the 3 states I mentioned, or California and the 3 states I mentioned. This is also the 3 states I mentioned and Illinois or Maryland. And Maryland has super strict gun laws and still runs into the same issue.
Yeah,
Why? Because Baltimore is there. So
Because
the
Baltimore,
problem, right? Exactly. You know why that matters when
That's not
Baltimore is
true.
there?
Large urban areas
States
generally
in
tend to
Maryland
suffer
are
from gun
fantastic.
violence.
Yeah,
also
Maryland is
tend to
amongst the
suffer
best in the
from-
nation as far as states go on gun violence. That's
Who
just
is?
misinformation what you're saying. Maryland.
Who is?
Maryland.
No, that's what I said. Look at their homicide rate.
But yeah, homicide
Yeah,
rate
it's still
included.
pretty good.
And Sav, there's generally, again, I've looked extensively into this. There's generally a huge correlation between like heavily condensed populated urban areas and higher rates of gun violence, but this is not an indicator of the state's effective like gun control laws as a whole. Generally, there's like quite a disparity between those two things.
The point is, again, and this is the point that I've made repeatedly that I don't know why I have to keep fucking repeating, is that if you have multiple states that act as contradictions to your claim that there's a causal factor, you can't use that as a causal factor. So Maryland does have some really strict gun laws. That's why I brought it up. They have very strict gun laws. They have relatively low ownership rates. They have very high gun homicides. They have very high gun deaths. They have higher gun deaths in places. Stop. They have higher gun deaths than places that have higher ownership rates and less strict or fucking practically non-existent in the place of in case of New Hampshire's gun laws. So it's not just 1 or 2 outliers. It's also comparing those outliers to what you would consider a model version of state law. And if you're going to make the argument, oh well, they're in Maryland, so they're in New England, so maybe they can just go to the other states and get their guns. The problem that you have to answer from doing that is still why do the other states that those guns are coming from not have the same issues? They don't, because the correlative factor, the causal factor, the one that has the much stronger trend line than gun ownership rates, than fucking gun laws, any of that is always socioeconomic. Always. That's why Louisiana and Mississippi are always the fucking highest.
No, it's simply not the case. So if you were to, when we talk about correlations, you keep using this word causation. At no point have I said cause or causation, right? So I clearly said correlation. And I agree it's a correlation. And if we were to plot these things on a graph, you see clear trend lines that point directionality into these outcomes. So we can see that generally, right, the tighter gun regulations are within a state, the better the outcomes are as far as the gun violence, death rates, and other things that we're talking about on this panel.
Yeah,
and so it's just a very clear observation, and we can try to dismiss that data.
It's not true, and I can prove it's not true.
Absolutely true. I've got it in front of me.
Stop.
I'm happy to show it. Hold on.
Hey, stop. Casimir, I'm gonna. You get to go, but I want Sovereign to disprove it. He says he can disprove it. I want to give him the chance to do so. But again, a Pratt Brat needs to go next after this back and forth. And we just have to have that because she hasn't talked at all. So, yeah. Go ahead. Disprove it. Go ahead.
Easily. So, no, go ahead. Who was going to talk?
You're going to talk right now because no one gets to decide who gets to talk. You do.
Okay. So, you not only have Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, you also have Montana, Wisconsin, Colorado, Washington, Nebraska, Oregon, Connecticut, Iowa, Rhode Island, Virginia, West Virginia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Ohio, Florida.
This is gun
Indiana.
laws, correct?
These are gun laws that are stricter than the ones that are in Illinois, but Illinois still has a higher gun homicide rate and gun death rate. You can do the same thing for Maryland. You can look at the laws. You can look at the laws. It's not just wrong. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
I'm looking at it right now. Illinois has a gun death rate per capita of about 11 on here. And hold on. And the states you're quoting are higher. So like you mentioned Montana. Let's find Montana. Montana's is 17.
Homicide rate. Do you understand the difference?
I do understand the difference.
You should
hold on. I'm not excluding suicides from this, but even if we do, we see the same directionality here.
Hey,
like it's just
that's literally not true. And you're literally making shit because
I've linked the sources like 3 times in chat. You should look at that.
I can link the source as well. And here's the data that you're looking at from the CDC. What's Vermont's gun death rate? You have it up. So what is it?
Actually, I'm on World Population Review right now. I can flip back to the CDC if you would like.
Go to let's say 2021, right?
Do you want me to go back?
I want you to go to the 2021
The
CDC data
CDC?
for firearm mortality by states that you had up earlier that you thought you were proving a
Sure.
fucking point with. Yes.
Sure, I'm happy
Are we
to.
just
I'm
arguing over if someone's right over their statistics they pulled up or not? Is that what we're doing right now?
No,
Apparently.
what's happening right now is that two people disagree over the statistics, which is what I wanted to say.
I just want to make sure I was on the same page.
Vermont's is 11.9, the death rate on the CDC, and Montana's. What's Montana's? Why don't you say it? It's 25.1.
What's Illinois?
We're looking at volume.
What's
11.
Illinois?
Illinois is 16.1 less than Montana.
I know how to sort a column. Look at Illinois.
Illinois is 16.1, which is less than Montana. Do you understand that?
I'm not
what you just said.
Montana. I'm saying, look at New Hampshire.
You just said Montana was higher.
People can please link it in my Twitch chat so people can look at it themselves. I want to get
gun deaths
Yeah, sure.
because you care.
I'll link a few. I'll link a few.
Okay.
Also, I want to ask you a question.
No, first, no, before anyone else goes. Pratt Brat, you have your time.
Oh, that's true.
Go
That's
ahead.
true.
Okay, so in my case, as somebody who is an advocate for, I wouldn't say gun control, but gun restrictions, and a firearm owner, there's only about 20 states in the United States that have the red flag law, and in those red flag states, they have seen a significant decrease in mass shootings. And of the mass shootings that do occur in those states, it is statistically proven that it was the law enforcement that did not know that that was a tool that they could use to prevent those mass deaths. I think that if you want to own a gun, it is your right, barring you go through education and licensing. I even think that you should have to take out an insurance policy and have your guns like registered to you and renew that registration every single year, just like we do cars. And have your fingerprints scanned into a federal system in order to have those guns.
I think everything you just said is perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, that's because you hate the proletariat and you hate poor people and you love the government.
I have so many problems with
Falser,
that.
I want to ask you a question.
Hold on. That's the reason.
Falser, I want to ask you a question. You said a minute ago, right, that South Carolina has weak gun laws, right?
Comparative to the other states, yes, they're in the bottom
weak
half.
gun laws, right? Okay, so I just put into Wick's chat so that we can kind of keep this on point. Opencarry.org. On the map, it shows South Carolina as being one of the states that restricts the carrying of open firearms. So there's two ways that you can carry a firearm: open or concealed, right? So if you're restricting half of the fucking ways that people can even carry a firearm, how the fuck are you going to sit there and tell me, oh, we've got weak gun laws, but 50% of the way you can fucking carry
that's
is
only one way of
That's
looking
just
at gun
one facet
restrictions.
of the law.
There's a ton of them.
It's looking at it in totality because other states
ass
have
about
that
trying to
and
fucking
more.
carry through South Carolina.
Statistics.
Other states have that and more critically.
That when I expressed a connection, Wick called my idea that a genocide is possible in the future preposterous. He said basically
not possible. Like you weren't implying that it was possible. Obviously, it's possible. I'm saying that it's likely. No, right? Nor does it necessarily follow. No,
of course. Right. And when I brought in the argument that a Jew in World War I Germany who served in the German military in the First War did not know that he will end up in a concentration camp in the Second World War. And the reason why nobody wants to discuss this because it's easier to slide into statistics, into this guy said this guy disagreed with that. Somebody is more right with statistics, but nobody wants to understand the principle. And the principle is that you are responsible for your security, both against the government and against other people. And in countries where you don't have that, you're always on the brink, not just the possibility, but the likely possibility of things escalating. And you can notice this by the level of police brutality engaged against citizenry. You can see a correlation between police brutality in France, where grenades were thrown at protesters and had their arms torn off. And we didn't find it from the French TV because it's controlled by their government, but we did find about it from Twitter. We can see a correlation between that and what happens in Belarus, what happens in the Far East in Russia, what happens in many other countries where governments hold advantages over the citizens. It becomes cheap to beat up protesters. And you can see that in the United States because unarmed protesters, like in Occupy Wall Street, were easily dispersed by very violent police, including in New York City. They were beaten up. They know that they have the lumps, the Antifa guys that are now in Antifa.
Do you think guns in the situation? Let's say the Antifa.
But
Let's stick to the
Tea Party protests were never dispersed with violence and with pepper spray.
I understand. Okay, but let's use the
armed.
Black Lives Matter protest. Do you think that the protesters being armed with guns would have made that situation better or worse?
I think that,
and by better or worse, I mean less violent or more violent.
People from those communities multiple times appeared on television in various reports, and you can see that on YouTube right now, standing with guns protecting their neighborhoods.
And
those people de-escalated within their
You think
areas.
it would have been worse without those
escalated
guns?
Violence significantly, and violence spread to areas where people did not do that. So it was the people. Listen, in Kenosha, during the Rittenhouse case, one thing people omit, we saw that the FBI was tracking the situation from a plane or a drone and had like infrared footage of the riots. They saw everything happen, and
can we stop the filibuster?
And sure, and police were surrounding that area, not entering.
Okay, so guns. I'm just gonna say you're wrong. I don't have the stats in front of me to kind of like go through one by one, but in principle, right, that you are wrong, right? This only applies if you are strong and if you are able to do that, because this principle that you mentioned, that only you are responsible for your defense, handicapped, the weak, the women, all these things, they are at a disadvantage here. So we must and should rely on the community, which is the government, right, in a larger scale, to help, right, to help with that, right?
He's probably signaling to you that guns are the
guns,
equalizer in that situation. But
if you can't afford a gun, if you're too poor to afford a gun, you can't do it, right? And guns are expensive. Have you tried to buy a rifle?
You made registration in New York City.
Expensive.
Why is it? Hold on.
Or 500 right now. So the registration costs more than the gun in New York City. That's why in New York City people.
Yo, if you're in poverty, dude, you can't afford a gun no matter like.
Wait, I don't know why you're even trying to say that. Because the reality is that a gun is no different than any other consumer purchase that you would make. If you have a need for it,
and I think that the government should help provide other consumer purposes too. Like this doesn't just apply to guns, in my opinion.
I mean that's the kind of the point. Is that if you need something, you're gonna work to get the money to be able to
I can't
have
hear
it.
anything anyone is saying.
I have a verifying
Yep,
question
exactly.
for Casimir. Unless you want to let Anja go first, because he's been waiting for quite a while.
Yeah.
Anja, go first.
So we're talking about a lot of data right now, and what was his name? Falsers was kind of bringing up the idea that we should be making correlations with this data and then coming to conclusions based on that. He didn't really say that, you know, he wanted to stay away from the fact that he was coming to conclusions, but I think we all kind of understand that the point of the correlations is to use those to come to conclusions.
He's not shying away from that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree completely with that. That is the point.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, at one point you were saying that you weren't trying to make any conclusions. So I'm just
I said the
trying to
specific
retread this
metric
water.
I was referencing is not causation; it's correlation, which is to say it's bigger than the one thing we're talking about.
Okay, I just want to let everyone know right now, if I don't get a little more financial support, we're going to end this because I'm hungry. But if you give me enough money, we'll keep this conversation going. And I hope you like this conversation enough to keep it going. So give me subs, give me bits. Let me know it's worth my while to continue this conversation.
No pain, no gain, Wick.
So
$500 to register a handgun in New York City, and about I think $250 for a shotgun. Whereas a poor person can own can actually buy a firearm in another state.
We gotta let Anja finish. We gotta let him finish.
Anja didn't get his chance. Go ahead.
My issue with the conclusions we're making here is that I can only assume your end point is that the guns are responsible, and if we just get rid of or restrict guns, therefore, that is the best possible conclusion to make here. But I would assume both Kilo and Falsers here, if they saw data like FBI crime statistics or something, we understand that there's more nuance to that than just saying that black people commit a certain amount of crime just because they're black. Like, there are people that will just say that that's true.
I don't think this data is without nuance. I don't think he's examining it. Okay, go ahead.
But my point earlier was that I don't feel like this is inherently a gun problem. It is a people problem. It is a societal failure that we are going
So,
through right now.
Can I respond briefly, Anja?
Go ahead, Falsers.
So the first thing I would point out is that when we're talking about the data, it's not such that like we want to look at one or two things and then start to come to those conclusions. It's that like we form a hypothesis and we say, I wonder if this is the problem. And then we look at the first metric and we're like, oh, well, there's some evidence there. And then we look at the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th metrics. And if we keep looking at these metrics and we keep seeing some directionality pointing to this hypothesis, then we can start to make some conclusions. And that's more where I'm at. So the conclusions I'm making are not specifically to like say, hey, we get rid of all guns and the problem completely disappears. I agree with you that we have other problems aside from the guns. Where we probably diverge is that I think we can work on both those things at the same time. And I think it's about harm reduction. So I think we should absolutely work on, I think we should absolutely work on mental illness and mental health. But at the same time, a mentally ill person that has high capacity magazines in their gun that goes out with a semi-automatic rifle is going to be able to do a lot more harm than a mentally ill person with a knife.
Wait. So are you for the death penalty?
Oh, please.
I'm not.
We already went
not.
over this.
So if you really want to talk about like ultimate harm reduction,
what he just said is if he cherry picks the data the way he wants, and if he chooses
That's not what he said at all. That's not what he said at all.
The correlation that
no, that's not at all what I've said.
That's between the lines. Between the lines is that he will cherry pick the data.
Casimir, can you spare the panel in the chat another 5 minutes of your bad faith filibustering, and can we move on?
It is filibustering because you won't engage with my point, which was superior to yours.
Because I can't engage with your points when you talk for 10 minutes. You make 10 million points, and then we just like talk about something.
Remember, chat, 1,000 bits to mute whoever you like.
Posting.
1,000 bits to mute whoever you like on this panel. Just I'm giving the power to the people. Just FYI, right? Okay, carry on.
It's really more like power to the purse of the people, but.
You know what? And that's okay too, because look. I don't see my chat as people. I see them as pocketbooks. Okay, pocketbooks to be exploited. Okay, that is how I see all my chat in both YouTube and on Twitch.
And that way, there's no reason to get emotionally entangled.
I just wanted to briefly say, in response to what Anja said, I agree with a lot of what Falser said, if not outright agree with everything. I mean, I don't think I for 1 second pretended that there weren't socio-political or socioeconomic components of our gun problem, which I do think it is a gun problem. I just think in the same spirit, I mean, we went over this multiple times. The most prevalent, available, efficient, useful, any other word you can use to describe why people choose guns at a rate of 91% for homicides is that's paramount in deciding how we mitigate these deaths and these suicides, in my opinion, as well. How we mitigate that as much as possible, as quickly as possible. We could still address the other things on top of it. Now, there are some people who are on this panel and some guests who have jumped in after the fact who say that the harm that is associated with our gun culture is not as bad as the harm that would be sustained in getting rid of them and having to deal with the effects of inviting essentially a tyrannical government. And that's a conversation I'm willing to have. But if anyone is going to make the claim that outlawing guns or removing them from the streets overnight would not reduce our violence problem or our murder rates, it is extremely bad faith.
I would make that argument. I definitely think it's in good faith. I mean, it didn't work for drugs. Why is it going to work for?
I think you like guns and it's cope.
No,
let's Gib finish. Let Gib get his points out. So
sure,
we're on drugs. Elaborate, please.
Yeah, I mean, so we made this war on drugs, and the war on drugs is basically people wanted their drugs. You know, they like drugs. I mean, that's the exact argument you just made about me liking guns. You know, so like, here's the thing. You know, if it didn't work then, it didn't work for prohibition. Why is it going to work for this?
What are you saying? It didn't. What do you mean when you say it didn't work? What are you saying when you say it? What do you?
I mean, every year the increase in drug use goes up. I mean, that's just every year. I mean, look, when alcohol was eliminated under prohibition, I don't have the exact statistics, but I know it was so widespread and causing more like violent problems that they ended up repealing it.
There's a lot of complicated.
Wait, do you even know why they started alcohol prohibition?
There's a lot of complicated components to bringing up prohibition because there's theories that the government only overturned prohibition because they were losing out on all the tax profit from alcohol sales.
My point that I'm making here is that we already have these restrictive laws in place, and they don't work for other things. So now we're going to just come in and wholesale snap our fingers and take these guns, and you think that's going to lower crime when every other example?
No one said that.
We've done
well,
that.
Hold on. No one's saying like let's go take them all at once. I hadn't heard anybody take that position. So that's like a straw man.
I take that standpoint from an idealist perspective. I obviously don't think that should be implemented. I think it would be some serious ramifications of that. I agree with a lot of what actually 𝕵𝖎𝖙 said. I think those are very reasonable mediums to suggest. I don't think that there's any one solution to this or any one proposed solution that is going to work for everyone, which is why earlier I said we're essentially deciding between the lesser of two or however many evils. Obviously, there's going to be sufferers with whatever procedures, whatever regulations you introduce. That doesn't mean that it doesn't outweigh. I think what outweighs those consequences are reducing our gun deaths.
It's really strange to me, Gibbs, that like everyone takes issue when I show like 8 different data points and everyone's like trying to find like the minutia and the outliers and like explain them away. And you just drew a comparison.
The issue with the last chart you had.
And you just drew a parallel between like the gun violence problem and the drug problem, right? So the answer to your question of like why do we do these things? Well, it's because the gun problem is a specific and complex thing with complex and specific issues, and the drug problem is a different thing with a different set of issues.
But they're very
one or the other.
I want to toss. Stop.
He's a good badge.
I want to toss it to Isaac. Go ahead, Isaac.
Hey, I'd like to make a suggestion, Wick, and it kind of relates to what 𝕾𝖍𝖎 was saying. I would like to think that this would lead the panel into a more constructive.
You know what? I will take suggestions, right? If they are backed up by money, because we're going to end this soon if I don't get enough subs in like the next 2 minutes. So go ahead, make your
we
suggestion.
Can let the chaos ensue. I was going to say if we could just go around real quick and let everybody say what they believe would reduce murder in the United States, like what their prescription would be.
Sure. What you start? How do you reduce murder?
So I think it's a combination of the 2 problems that have been brought up repeatedly throughout this panel, guns and mental health. I think it's both. I don't know what the ratio is. Yeah, that's a tough one. But I would say guns and mental health. So there needs to be some sort of
that's a good quick answer. That's a good quick answer. Guns and mental health. A little bit's $10 to mute Isaac. Okay, sorry, Isaac, you're muted. But $10,
Isaac, I thought you did great, man.
Okay, 𝕾𝖍𝖎 agrees. What do you think, �11𝐿? How do you solve murder in the U.S.?
I think that it's a preposterous idea to solve murder. It's like a human issue.
So you don't think we can?
So, but I will answer. I think that you will. I think that the person, the sovereign, is sort of right in many ways. It's a socioeconomic and cultural as well problem. I think that culture and socioeconomic status are connected to each other. And so one of the ways, there are several ways you can do that, but one of the main ways is you have to deal with the various monopolies that exist in the United States that are suppressing people's ability to earn money and build up their resilience in their communities. So the Federal Reserve would have to go. The monopoly on currency in the United States would have to go. Taxation has to be significantly reduced. Military spending has to be significantly reduced. IP monopolies have to go. And then as a result, what will happen is there will be more money for mutual aid societies, community policing. Things like the X for Boys is a good example. Randall King in Atlanta,
just to summarize,
building a school for boys and bringing them away from crime and from gangs. He's doing that via donations.
We want to do this quickly. So to summarize, vastly reduced taxation, vastly reduced military spending, getting rid of the Federal Reserve, and getting rid of the currency monopoly in the United States. That would solve murder?
So that people like Randall King from X for Boys can actually solve the problem on the local level.
Fair enough. Okay, got it. Brat, what's your solution?
So as I do agree with the mental health, I do think that not every mentally unwell person commits mass murder, and not everybody who commits mass murder is mentally unwell. I do support putting more money into mental health resources, but I think a better thing would be to higher enforce our red flag laws. So take these people who cops have incidences of dealing with somebody who has like domestic violence or like domestic disputes, putting them on a watch list. If they have guns, then we need to petition the courts to take those guns away until they complete classes, on top of paying a fine to get their guns back. I do think that we need to make it so that we don't have high capacity magazines available to the general public to own.
Red flag laws,
And
high capacity magazines. What else?
I think that's about it.
Cool.
That I can think of right now.
Cool. Just real quick, Isaac, are you in a suit and tie? Well, I don't see a tie, but a suit.
Dude, he went and changed and cleaned up so quickly.
I know that was,
it
that's
was like
fancy.
Superman in the
that's
phone
enough
booth.
to get you on a closed panel at some point if you dress up like that for me. That's beautiful. Black Fox, go ahead, quickly. We gotta get through these. Solving murder. Go ahead. Give us your top two ways to solve murder. Go ahead, quickly.
Yeah, so I would say that my two things would be definitely kind of the Donald Trump way would be a unification of America. That's honestly the only way out of this. To renationalize the civilians
I need
of
you
America.
to elaborate on the unification of. I'm sorry, I know I said real quick, but now I'm going to need you to elaborate on that. The unification
There's simple
of
things such as money is always the answer. Social money as incentives for community basis. So if you build communities and you can prove certain things, we make a new form system, make it very bureaucratic, this, that, and the other. That if you yourself and your community prove that you can build and sustain and maintain your own communities by yourself without government intervention, that you get more money into your community.
Without government intervention, you mean like no cops?
No, I'm saying by you local neighborhoods set up your own certain recycling, your communities make their own after school programs, you do your own things with education and such and so forth, making it pretty much forcing you by money incentives that you have to go forward and be friendly to your neighbors and the people around you, that you have to interact with people and you have to be nicer to your fellow people, making it so that we build a closer network of people to where you're not actively trying to harm the people around you.
Okay. I think China has model cities. It has very much the same kind of concept behind them. Interesting that you would use China as an example. That's great. Sovereign, go ahead. Two real quick.
Yeah, there's a couple things. One is investment in poverty reduction, since a lot of this does correlate socioeconomically. One of the things that worked really well was there was a program in Cincinnati. I forget when it was, but it was called like Cincinnati. I know it was CIRV. I think it was like Cincinnati Initiative to Reduce Violence or something along those lines. But it had like a 38% reduction in gang-related homicides, firearm-related homicides, everything. As soon as they implemented that, it was like a 42 or 48 month initiative. They checked in at a midway point, then an end point, and by the end of things, it was like direct intervention in the community, doing early intervention stuff with at-risk communities and populations, and people that voluntarily wanted to go say like, I want to get out of this life and do whatever else. The socioeconomic part's a big part of it, but there's also just income inequality broadly. If you look at other countries that have issues with gun homicide rates, what you'll notice in comparison and in making those comparisons directly to the U.S. is that broadly, when you compare the U.S. to like Brazil or whatever, even still then, Brazil will have a much higher murder rate. I think their murder rate's like almost 4 times as high as ours. But what you also notice is that their income inequality and their poverty countrywide is very similar to how some of our regions are in the United States. So if you compare specific regions like Louisiana or Mississippi or some of those places where we have a lot of the homicide, a lot of the gun violence, things like that, they're comparable in those socioeconomic conditions to developed countries, which is what everybody always wants to mention for some reason in this conversation. It's fucking developed countries, but we have areas of our country that don't compare 1-to-1 to developed nations in fucking Sweden or whatever. So those are the areas that you have to infuse more cash into, get rid of some of those income inequality problems, and do that early intervention in.
Okay, noted. Kilo, quickly. I know maybe people don't know what quickly means. Like maybe I needed to find that.
Dude, I'll give you like
class.
3 sentences.
Go ahead.
From an idealistic standpoint, I just don't think that we should possess firearms. I think we've abused the privilege. But obviously, from a practical standpoint, and because I know that I can't be an authoritarian communist all the time, I can say that I think that a lot of the ideas that have been introduced, Sovereign, what he just said, actually, I'd be completely fine with. addressing the income inequality, addressing lack of capital investment in impoverished areas, addressing infrastructure, all these sorts of things to bring the general populace more in line with what we expect out of like a middle class community, which tends to be safer.
Falsers, you're up.
That was about 10 lines. Just
Yeah,
to
it
be
was
clear.
it was long sentences, but that's okay. Anja, go ahead.
Lots of
Every
no,
time
no,
you're
no,
gonna,
Anja, falsers first. Falsers first. My
yeah,
bad.
every time you're thinking about committing gun violence, this image pops up on your computer, full screen, and you have to deal with that. But outside of that, I would say I agree. I agree with what Sovereign said. I think socioeconomics are a huge factor in mitigating these things. I think access to the actual weaponry that is being used to make killing so easy is a huge thing. We need to mitigate that through regulation. And I think a focus on more resources and things like mental health is important. More broadly, social programs in general to help close some of these gaps, I think would do a great deal to mitigate our negative outcomes.
Thank you. CTV, quickly.
Forced conscription of all American citizens at the age of 18 for a term no less than 1 year where they can receive firearms and survival training necessary to be able to repel all foreign nations that would even consider invading my beautiful land. Also, the government would then fund all of the manufacturing necessary to issue 22 caliber firearms to every United States citizen, and with enough ammo capable of...
Does this include minors?
Didn't I just say 18?
Oh, sorry, missed it.
That would also include enough ammo to be able to fire at least 400 rounds per quarter. So 100 rounds a month. That way they can stay not only efficiently accurate with their weapon, but they can also help reduce the squirrel population, especially in major cities, by collecting no less than 1 squirrel per month.
Be 150 a month. There are 4 quarters, not 3 in a year. But
oh well, you know,
it's okay.
We'll get there.
My math might be off too because this is the public math.
I thought a quarter was 4 months.
No, a quarter is 2.
But that'd be 16-month year, wouldn't it?
3 months, sorry,
months, yeah.
Let's
I've
go
been on the
to
Gentleman Jack.
Admiral
Gentleman
Gibbs.
Jack.
That's fine. Admiral Gibbs, your answer.
The question is how to reduce murder. Okay, it's real simple. It's gonna be quick. We just get rid of the cruel, unusual punishment clause, and we bring back public execution. Problem solved. You got to slow it down way significantly.
Okay, that's an answer. Anja, you're last about this. Save it, please.
All right. So there's like 3 main fields, right? The home, the school, and then like personal life with friends and stuff. We need to enrich these 3 areas and make sure that people are having the best possible outcomes and reduce the amount of like socioeconomic stress, basically a lot of the stuff that the Sovereign was talking about before. But I think that we're having a failure to address some of these family issues, these school issues, and these places where kids are spending a majority of their time. This is a social failure that we're having right now that we have yet to address in our country.
Okay. Gang, you know what's going to reduce the murder rate for me is by ending this panel. Because thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. But I am hungry. I'm hangry, right? And I want to get out of here. Gang, we got great shows for you next week coming up. Okay, no streams over the weekend because I got to go see Sisu in theaters. That's going to be beautiful. I also, right, gotta, have some relaxed time and cook up some content for you. So if you've been liking the content, like, subscribe if you're on the YouTube. Follow me on Twitch if you are on Twitch. Also, what do we got coming up? So next week topics include President Sunday versus Lav on What is a Woman. That'll be a fun one, right? And also, we're going to be talking about should Twitch allow links to OnlyFans? So should streamers be able to link their OnlyFans to their chat on Twitch? Or should that be banned? And we could extend it to other platforms too as well. YouTube, Kick, Grumble, etc. Should that be allowed? Or should we ban links to not safe for work things on things like Twitch? We're going to find out. We're going to check it out. We're going to learn next week. We're going to have some other panels, but I haven't cooked them up yet, and we'll figure it out. So with that, we're going to rate out. Which one of you is streaming right now? Any of you
Me.
streaming? Oh,
Me.
critical veterans
I
stream.
have a question really
And I'm
quick.
gonna
What's
do
your question, real
call-ins.
quick?
I'd love to have that one.
So if you're thinking about like content for next week or anytime in the future, I'm interested in the war on drugs and if we can get enough people together to have that discussion.
Okay, we can absolutely do
Yes.
that. That might be an interesting Friday panel.
If
So
you
if you're
only
interested
knew
in that, contact
someone
me.
that had like a breadth of knowledge about that, Wick.
If only. I know I've asked you on my closed panels before, but you've declined. So.
Well, this time around, Wick, you know, I
Maybe.
suppose I can't say no to that beard.
I guess.
Okay.
I guess. But for now, wave bye-bye because we're ready now. See you guys. Bye.
Thanks.